Township of Howell Zoning Board of Adjustment, Monday, July 25th, 2022. I hereby declare this meeting of the Howell Township Zoning Board to be open, adequate notice having been given pursuant to the New Jersey Open Public Meeting Act in the following manner. First, on December 14th, 2021, a copy of said notice was mailed to the Asbury Park Press and the Tri-Town News. Second, on December 14th, 2021, a copy of said notice was hand-delivered to the clerk of the Township of Howell. Third, on December 14th, 2021, said notice was posted in the office of the zoning board and on the bulletin board in the Howell Township Municipal Building, 4567, Route 9, Howell Township, New Jersey. Please take note that this meeting is being videotaped for possible future broadcasts on Howell Township TV 77. This meeting is a judicial proceeding. Any questions or comments must be limited to the issues of what the board may legally consider in reaching a decision, and a decorum appropriate to a judicial hearing must be maintained at all times. For any members of the public wishing to ask questions or comment on an application, you will need to use the raise your hand feature when the chairman opens the hearing up for members of the public. Once you're brought into the meeting, you will need to have both audio and video, and you will be sworn in and required to give your name and address. If you're calling in, you could press *9 to raise or lower your hand and *6 to mute and unmute yourself.
Thank you, Eileen. May we have a roll call, please?
We need to swear in Michael Rubel before the roll call.
The way Eileen has it set up, it's after. Okay. Whatever. That works. So you want to let him in then, Eileen?
He's coming in.
Okay, great.
Let him know to unmute and wait.
Hey, Mike. Everyone hear me okay?
We hear you just fine, Mike. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, Mike, before we proceed, Mr. Bear is going to provide you with the oath, and if you would follow his instruction, it'll be greatly appreciated.
Okay, sounds good.
Is it Rubel, or how do you pronounce it?
Yeah, that's correct, Rubel.
Okay, Mr. Rubel, can you please raise your right hand? Thank you. Just repeat after me. I, Michael Rubel,
I, Michael Rubel,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully, impartially, and justly perform all duties of the office of zoning board member
to
to the best of my ability. And I'll support the Constitution of the United States
and I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey.
and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey,
And I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same
and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same
and to the governments established in the United States
and to the governments established in the United States
and in this state,
and in this state,
under the authority of the people,
under the authority of the people.
so help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes, we all give you a hand.
Welcome.
Welcome, Mike.
Glad to be here.
You're gonna learn a lot. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And our professionals are top notch. So you're more than welcome to invoke your professional experience as well. I understand that you are a geothermalist, or
No, geotechnical engineer, yeah.
you're a geotechnical engineer. Awesome. Okay, great. Okay, so Eileen, may we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Mr. Cantor,
Here.
Mr. Hughes,
Here.
Mr. Mertens,
Here.
Mr. Moretti,
Here.
Mr. Roscoe is excused, Mr. Stanton,
Here.
Mr. Rubel,
Here.
and Chairman Saya.
Here.
You have
Thank
a
you.
quorum.
Thank you. So will everyone please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
One
nation, under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
for all. Thank you, everyone. So, Mr. Bear, can we have a swearing in of the board professionals, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Do you swear the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Professionals are sworn, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Next up on the agenda is approval of minutes for the regular meeting 23 May 2022. Eligible voters: Cantor, Hughes, Mertens, Orozco, Stanton, and Saya.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Mertens,
I'll
second,
second.
and that was
I'll second.
Stanton. Roll call, please.
Mr. Cantor,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
Yes.
Mr. Mertens,
Yes.
Mr. Stanton,
Yes.
and Chairman Saya.
Yes.
Minutes
Next up, thank you. Next on the agenda is regular meeting July 11th, 2022. Eligible voters: Cantor, Hughes, Mertens, Orozco, and Saya. This is also approval of those minutes.
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chair.
A motion? Do we have a second? Second on Mertens. Roll call, please.
Mr. Cantor,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
Yes.
Mr. Mertens,
Yes.
and Chairman Saya.
Yes,
Minutes approved.
thank you. Eileen, do we have any vouchers?
No vouchers tonight.
Do we have any correspondence?
Yes, we have a few things. We have an email from Walter Toto, attorney for Home Sweet Home. Was scheduled for a hearing tonight. He asked that his application be rescheduled to August 22nd, 2022, and he granted the board an extension of time through September 30th, 2022.
So if I understand this correctly, case number BA 18-23, Sierra Papa, Home Sweet Home Daycare Center. Anyone who's in the audience that's here for this application will be carried to August 22nd, 2022, with an extension of expiration to September 2022. And Eileen, this requires no further notice?
No, it was not carried because they never did their notices.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, second, an email was sent to all township employees and members of the boards and committees that they need to sign into their township email account and change their passwords. The new passwords must be at least 10 characters and contain an uppercase letter, lowercase letter, a number, and a symbol. Once you have changed the 10-digit password, the 3-month password reset change will be eliminated. Please note that they will be auditing accounts to make sure everyone has complied. If you have questions about the password change, please contact Eileen Urbano.
Thank you, Eileen. I know that every 3 months I've got to change and it's problematic. Any further correspondence?
No, that's it for tonight.
Okay, great. So then, I understand the resolution BA 19-23, the Shivas Emekatora is being pushed. Is that correct, Mr. Bear?
Well, Mr. Chairman, late in the day, I did get a confirming email from Mr. Pape. He had no objections or comments to the form of resolution. The board engineer also approved the form, so it is ripe if we want to go ahead for consideration.
Okay, so then, on resolutions, fellow board members, resolution granting 1-year extension of time. Eligible voters: Cantor, Hughes, Mertens, Orozco, and Saya. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion, Mr. Mr. Chair.
Hughes makes a motion.
I'll second.
Mertens seconds it. May we have a roll call, please, Eileen?
Mr. Cantor,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
Yes.
Mr. Mertens,
Yes.
and Chairman Saya.
Yes.
Resolution memorialized.
Okay, Mr. Pape, he no longer has to answer any more questions for us just yet, eh? Okay, so applications before the board. Case number BA 22-05, which is Howell Township Development LLC. This is a use variance and preliminary and final site plan with bulk variances. Under the description, application of Howell Township Development LLC as applicant and owner seeking approval for a Delta 6 use variance and preliminary and final major site plan approval with bulk variances to demolish the existing two-story building and construct a 27,700 square foot, four-story office building with associated site improvements consisting of 90 space parking lot, one full movement driveway, site lighting, landscaping, building signage, trash refuse enclosure, retaining wall, and underground stormwater management basin on premises known as Block 69, Lot 1, 6950 US Highway 9 South. Expiration date 24 September 2022. Mr. Pape.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, board members, board professionals, and public. My name is Kenneth Pape. I'm an attorney with the firm of Heilbrunn Pape. And this evening I have the responsibility and the privilege of representing your applicant, Howell Township Development LLC, and its principal, Shlomo Rosenbaum. And as you've read into the record, this is an application for preliminary and final site plan approval with a D6 variance for the height of the proposed building. And I think that we also have one remaining bulk variance. Before we begin a substantive presentation, Mr. Chair, could either your secretary or counsel confirm receipt of our notices and confirm the board has jurisdiction to hear us this evening?
Mr. Pape, Mr. Bear,
Yes, the board has jurisdiction, Mr. Chairman.
thank you.
Thank you. This is an application to remove a building that has been vacant by last count approximately a little more than 25 years. A restaurant that was viable a long time ago and has sat as an empty building for the past 25 plus years is proposed to be removed from the site. The building has a footprint of approximately 8,000 square feet. The building that's proposed has a footprint of approximately 8,000 square feet. The building that is proposed is a multi-story building. Portions are 3 stories and some of the building is 4 stories. The 8,000 square foot footprint is being moved further away from the stream corridor that is one of the property's borders. The application will be presented to you by the following professionals. Graham McFarland is the design engineer with PDS, and he will be the initial witness who will help us locate the property, go through existing conditions, describe the proposed development plan in an executive overview style, and then we'll go through some of the details of a site plan. Dr. Raymond Walker is the environmental scientist. And in this instance, it is the work of Dr. Raymond Walker and his staff, including Joseph Portnoy from Collier Services, that really needs to be focused on. This property has many environmental constraints. In fact, those environmental constraints are so daunting that over the last almost 30 years, no one attempted to resolve them. Before your applicant came to you this evening, your applicant hired Dr. Walker and his staff to work on all the environmental constraints, to secure all of the environmental permits, so that as we come before you, it is not with hopes that we can resolve those, but with proof that they have all been resolved in advance of this presentation. And Dr. Raymond Walker who just went through all of those proofs last week with your environmental commission, will do so this evening. Scott Kennel is the traffic engineer, and I'm going to ask that he go through the adequacy of parking, the adequacy of on-site circulation, and the driveway design and the DOT's jurisdiction over this project. Katie Flores is our architect. She has appeared before you in the past. She will present the building to you. I will tell you that in the last 24 hours, Ms. Beam has reached out to members of the professional staff. And as a result of comments from Ms. Beam, we're going to offer to reduce the building's height from 65 feet, as it's shown on the plans, to 52 feet, which is depending on how you measure it, it's somewhere between 11 and 13 feet of reduction. But the new building height that Ms. Flores will present is 52 feet. Our final professional witness is Christine Cafone, our professional planner, who is prepared to provide you with the planning arguments that are necessary to support the granting of the D6 variance. Without any further introduction, Mr. Chair, I am prepared to introduce Mr. McFarland. Mr. McFarland and I are in the same room. It's going to be a little bit of a Simon and Garfunkel on sharing a microphone, but I think this will work out fine. Mr. Graham McFarland, who is a professional engineer and a principal with PDS, they prepared the plans, and I'd ask if we could have him sworn and share his credentials with you, and we'll begin.
Mr. Pape, before we do so,
Yes.
is Mr. Graham going to be putting up the overall view site of where this location
Hoping
is?
that your moderator or Eileen would be able to control the screen for that purpose.
Eileen, you prepared? Or do we need Mr. Aguilar?
Yes, 1 second.
Okay, so Mr. Bear, would you please
Yes.
swear in?
Mr. McFarland, do you swear that the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
Please.
Yes, for the
state-
record, Graham
Go ahead.
McFarland, MACFARLANE, professional engineer, professional planner, certified municipal engineer, currently a principal of professional design services in Lakewood, New Jersey. By way of education, I received my Bachelor's of Science in Civil Engineering from Rutgers College of Engineering in 1987. I've been in this field of civil engineering ever since then. I obtained my license as a professional engineer in 1992. I've testified before approximately 75 different planning and zoning boards throughout the state, offering expertise in both planning and engineering matters. I also previously served as both the planning board engineer and the zoning board engineer in Lakewood Township. And I also previously served as the planning board engineer in Cinnaminson Township, and currently a principal of professional design services.
Okay,
Mr. Chair, respectfully request that you accept the credentials of Mr. McFarland and allow him to testify as an engineer this evening.
we will accept Mr. McFarland's credentials, sir.
Thank you. So I believe that we want to begin by putting A14, the aerial map before the
A16.
A16, the regional aerial map before the board. And as that is placed before the board, I'm going to ask that Mr. McFarland to identify the property, its location, take us around the property.
And then, Mr. Pape, I will have a question after he identifies the property for my engineer, Mr. Cunliffe.
Very fine.
All right.
Okay, Mr. McFarland, Mr. Chairman, your question before he begins?
Well, no, tell us where this lot, this
Sure.
lot is located, please.
Sure. The board can see Exhibit A16, which we have titled a regional aerial. It's a current aerial flight. It was dated March 8th of 2022. So it's just a few months old. You can see the site outlined in yellow. You can see the site's location on southbound Route 9. The site sits between Ford Road and West Kennedy Boulevard. this map, you can also see that the southern boundary of the site is the north branch of the Matitakok River, which has just been zoomed in on a little bit. And this map also shows some of the surrounding uses within the proximity of the subject premises. A shopping plaza immediately to the south, which is actually in Lakewood Township. The farm market immediately to the north of the site on the same side of Route 9. The Shoe Palace and the Eyes on 9, which I still refer to as the old Regency Diner, just across the street on Route 9. And some of the other commercial uses in the vicinity are identified on this map, just to give the board a clear understanding of where the site is and how it relates to the municipality. The entire property is located within the HD1 zone, within the highway development zone. That, of course, does permit professional offices as one of the principal uses in the zone. If we can next go to A17.
Could we have one question for you, Graham? What the size of the property? Could we put that on the record here?
Sure, the property is about 3.5 acres in total.
Thank you. A14?
A17, please.
A17?
A17 is also an aerial of the site that we just called a site aerial. It's got the same date, same flight date as the regional aerial A16 that we just viewed. This is just a view showing the current site conditions. You can see the building, the existing building on the bottom right-hand portion of the site, the green roof, and then the flat roof. The existing building has two components. The flat roofed portion is a one-story building. The green roofed portion with the gable roof is a two-story portion of the existing building. I'm sure all the board members are familiar with this site and this area of town. And as Mr. Pape alluded, this property has been vacant for 20 plus years. It really is an eyesore to the municipality. Our application, of course, is to redevelop the site in its entirety with a new office building, with essentially the same footprint, and then to upgrade the site amenities, the site improvements, to bring them into compliance with current standards. This exhibit again just shows the existing footprint and the portion of the site that is occupied by the existing parking area, which lies north of the building, and a loading area that lies just west of the footprint of the building, as you see on this aerial display.
Graham?
Mr. Graham, thank you. So, Charlie?
Yes,
Do we
Mr.
have-
Chair.
So, I'm going back to Peter Dabasco's days when he served as council member, right? And that Matitakok back there, that was when the new rules came in, that was what, a 300-foot standoff from that on the northbound side? Go ahead.
Yeah, it's the north branch of the Matitakok River. It's a C1 water body, so it's got a 300-foot riparian buffer associated with it. Along with that, there's also map wetlands. I'll let Mr. Pape and his professionals provide some more testimony, but in their EIS submission, they provided copies of their freshwater wetlands letter of interpretation, as well as permits for any disturbances within the associated buffers, as well as a flood hazard area verification permits. So what you're seeing presented to the board, the applicant, for the most part, has permits in hand for the proposed development. Having said that, I'll have some additional questions for Mr. Walker and Mr. Portnoy when they are sworn in to provide some testimony. There are some sidewalk on the south, west, and east side of the building that didn't look to be depicted on the reduced copy of the permit plans that were provided for the board's record. That's not to say 100% that the applicant is developing outside of that, but they would need to demonstrate, to the satisfaction of the board that what's being shown to the board is within the limits of approvals by DEP. Otherwise, they would potentially have to go back to DEP for those reapprovals. So we can vet that when we get to Mr. Walker and also to Mr. Portnoy.
Thank you, Charlie. My concern, of course, was when I first came to town, there was a hotel just across from that. And, or I should say a motel. And when that was taken down, you know, the construction, you know, was very difficult in that area. So I take it that's when we put the little shopping center to the north of it.
So I can tell you, looking at the applicant site plan, and I'll let the professionals provide more information on this. A portion of the parking area is within a regulated floodway. There's, you know, I believe from the applicant's permit, there's some signage that's dictated that must be placed and maintained in the parking area on the site for those reasons. There's also regulations as far as the structure itself on what elevations that needs to be placed at for flood compliance. But I'll let their applicant, their professional team provide more testimony on that.
Thank you, Charlie. Mr.
May
Pape?
we Mr. Chair, may we proceed?
Yes, please.
Fine. So as Mr. Cunliffe just outlined, the property does have environmental constraints. And as Mr. Cunliffe has indicated, the applicant provided copies of the approvals and permits from the DEP that were secured before we come before you this evening. Those are going to be briefly identified by Mr. McFarland. Those are going to be testified to more extensively by Dr. Walker, who is the next witness. We understand the importance of doing a thorough presentation, but I would like to stay with Mr. McFarland as the engineer to get through the site plan presentation, and we'll come back to the in-depth presentation of the environmental work that's been done. Mr. McFarland, if you could just take a moment to just kind of give a brief executive summary of the environmental constraints on the site, just so that we can acknowledge the obligation to address them before we go into the remainder of the design.
Sure, and those questions are right on point, as this site is significantly constrained by the environmental conditions. The site is, does border the Matitakok River. The site is occupied by freshwater wetlands, freshwater buffers, flood hazard area zone, as well as Category 1 buffer. And then in addition to those items that are regulated by the DEP, Howell Township has its own ordinance requirements that regulate the stream corridor, provides for a stream corridor buffer, and also provides for a protection area, 300 feet, basically similar to the Category 1 designation by the DEP. As Mr. Pape alluded to initially, this application, we have already secured all the necessary permits from the DEP for those items, which we worked closely with Dr. Walker in getting obtained from the DEP. And Dr. Walker's going to provide details of those permits and those items. If we could move along to Exhibit A18 next.
This is the site plan that you've prepared that has been colorized. So it's an exhibit, a colorized version of sheet 3.
Correct. And this was marked A18, and this is a plan showing the general layout of the site, the proposed building footprint, sidewalk and circulation paths around the building, as well as the vehicular circulation and the parking layout that is proposed for the site. This is just to give the board a clear snapshot of what the application is proposing, be it the 27,700 square foot 3/4-story building, as well as the 90 parking spaces in total. We do have 3 EV parking spots proposed, so we do satisfy ordinance requirements for parking based upon an additional credit that we receive for providing those EV parking stations. And you can see that the proposed building footprint is essentially in the same location as the existing building. We are requesting relief in regards to the front yard setback from Route 9 because the site is so constrained by the environmental constraints. And we are not proposing building any closer to Route 9 than what the existing building is.
Would it be an accurate statement that it's still an 8,000 square foot footprint, but you've moved it further away from the river?
We have definitely moved the building further from the river. And I would like to go to if we go to A20 next, and I could touch on that very very briefly. And again, Dr. Walker will be providing some more detail of the environmental constraints in the stream corridor requirements. This map shows both the existing condition on the left and it shows the proposed condition on the right. What we were attempting to visualize with this map is that you can see that the building footprint is shifted to the north. So the building is being moved out of the most environmentally sensitive areas so that we could still have a usable site, satisfy all of the DEP's permit requirements, and comply to the best ability that we could with the township ordinance requirements.
So, and Mr. McFarland, apologize for jumping in. I just want to clarify for the board's perspective too, and you can correct me if I'm speaking out of turn here. But on the left is the existing condition, right is the proposed condition. What you see here is three different colors. There's the township's 100-foot stream corridor, which is required from the center line of the North Branch of Metiticon. On top of that, you have an additional 100-foot stream corridor buffer, and then you have the outer limit. The last 100 is the entirety of the 300-foot riparian buffer required from North Branch Metiticon because it's a C1 water. So the beige would be any disturbance within the 100-foot stream corridor. The blue would be any disturbance within the outer 100 stream corridor buffer. And then the pink would be in the balance of the 300-foot riparian buffer. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Well described, thank you.
Yes, and what this map then goes on to tabulate is that the beige, which is within the stream corridor, current condition is about 4,300 square feet. Proposed condition is about 1,400 square feet. So just about a 3,000 square foot reduction in the most environmentally sensitive area. The blue area, the middle area, the stream corridor buffer, existing condition is about 18,745 square feet. Proposed condition 16,076 square feet. We got, so again, a reduction of about 2,700 square feet in that stream corridor buffer. And then the pink is the outer limits of the riparian buffer. That does show a proposed increase to the outer limits of the riparian buffer from about 21,000 to about 27,000 square feet. And you can see that visually, you can see that the parking lot has been expanded to the west. To accommodate the parking spaces that are needed to support the proposed application. In total,
Sorry, I apologize for jumping in. Just to clarify for the board too, right? So you said in that outer pink area, there is an expansion westerly with the proposed parking area, but can you talk about there's an existing paved parking area on the site, and there is some existing infrastructure to the west of that parking area, correct? It might not be visible from the surface, but there is some disturbance in that area. Is that correct?
yes, there is. You can see if you looking at the map on the left, you can see the bigger square is the parking area, and then right where the pointer is now, there are some remnants of parts of the septic system. I'm not exactly sure what parts of the septic system are exactly where on the site, but we did uncover some lids. So parts of a disposal field or storage system are located in that area. I did try to be somewhat conservative in estimating the size. Their size could be a little larger than what I have currently estimated on this map. But the point that we're trying to show is that we've done, we think a very nice job trying to push this building away from the most sensitive areas, making use of the portions of the property that are developable, resulting in a plan to redevelop the site that will be a benefit to the municipality, and just a very good application from soup to nuts.
So, and then just to add some more clarification for the board. So I know you said in the outer 100-foot stream corridor buffer, that's the area in blue on the right-hand side. The township's ordinance does allow for some buffer averaging, similar to how, the DEP treats wetlands buffers. So there's a blue area of some sidewalk and some parking area. The township ordinance does allow for reduction of that outer 100-foot stream corridor buffer to 70 feet. Would you, in your professional judgment, in the white space, west of your parking area, that's in pink would, it's conceivable that you could potentially reduce the buffer where the sidewalk and the parking area is, and then add some buffer in that white area west of your parking area, not over there, sorry. Yep, over in that area to make up, that buffer to kind of balance it out.
Correct. And I understand that the ordinance does allow for an averaging process, just like a TAW does. And this plan doesn't convey all of that information just yet, but we would, of course, like to work through those details with you as hopefully as part of resolution compliance.
I just want to point out for the board that a lot of these areas are existing disturbance, and the applicant is minimizing the disturbance with the proposed development. And in these areas that are outside of the regulated areas, from our ordinance, the applicant does have their permits from DEP for those, proposed, expansion and development. So I think it's just important for the board's reference.
Yeah, so Charlie,
Yep.
so this is the old Japanese restaurant, I think, right?
Yeah, it used to be a Sizzler at some time, and then it was something else. I'm going back to maybe early 2000s
Right,
with that.
yeah. Okay, I remember it now.
Yeah, I think
Yes,
that's
it
the
was.
old Nagasaki.
The Sizzler was not there. The Sizzler was where the Golden Farm.
The next one up, I
Yeah,
apologize.
yeah.
This is
This was
Shogun.
this was the Kobe restaurant, I think it was.
Yeah, it was the Japanese restaurant.
Yes.
Yes, Kobe Restaurant and Dinner Theater, and the Sizzler was just next door to the north. Years back. And if we could continue just to touch on some of the other site elements, we are also proposing stormwater management as part of this application to account for any increased runoff from the development. The application is below the threshold of major development, but the local ordinance, the Howell Township ordinance, does still require the applicant to reduce the runoff in a post-developed condition. So we do have underground storage proposed within the footprint of the parking area to satisfy that requirement.
Graham, currently, the last time this project was approved and built, it appears that it was done so with no stormwater management system at all.
That's correct. The previous building was constructed prior to any of those controls being in place. And this redevelopment will represent a betterment to those conditions.
So prior to the proposed development plans this evening, this property's only means of disposing of stormwater is to let it either go into the ground or sheet flow into the Matita.
Correct. And also this application will connect to the public sewer system as well. You heard me, I provided some discussion on elements of the existing sanitary sewer system that we have located. And certainly one would not be permitted to construct a septic system on this particular site and under current conditions, but there is a sewer line available connection. So this building will be connected to the public sewer system.
Before you and I go through some of the details of a site plan, I think the summary of where we are with the board is that we have, we're respecting the environmental constraints and working within permits secured by Dr. Walker. We are removing the septic system from the site and connecting this to the sanitary sewer system. And we're introducing a stormwater system where there wasn't one. And we're doing all of this with still remaining with an 8,000 square foot footprint building.
Correct.
If we could go, if you're ready, maybe we'll go through some of the site plan elements. We start with grading. What's necessary to accomplish this plan in the way of grading?
Well, maybe if we could just go back to A18, so we have that to look at while we're discussing. Yeah, that's it. So again, A18 is a color display, a color rendering of the proposed site work. You can see the new parking area proposed north of the building, but essentially 2/3 of this parking area is going to reuse the existing parking area. The existing parking area is in terrible condition. But what we're able to do is to mill and resurface that where the existing pavement exists, and then construct the new parking area. Basically, as you look at this plan on the left, it's about 1/3, maybe 40%. That will be expanded to the left or to the west as you look at this plan. You can also see the refuse enclosure and a loading area located in the left-hand corner of the parking area. And again, we're proposing that area to be shared by refuse and by any loading that would be necessary. We don't anticipate loading being provided by anything other than box trucks, FedEx trucks, or UPS trucks. But that area does provide a loading area or a staging area for those vehicles to stop and then make deliveries. There is a sidewalk that runs entirely from that loading area up to the building. Due to environmental constraints, the building is elevated above grade somewhat. The first floor of the building has to be set at elevation 54. So that is what the grading plan shows, and that's in accordance with the flood hazard area rules. Just for reference, the existing building has a 1-story portion and a 2-story portion. The 1-story portion of the existing building, the floor elevation is at about 49. So that portion of the building lies well below the flood hazard area. And just for reference, one would not be permitted to do that today. So with this construction, we're eliminating part of that encroachment into the flood hazard area. And again, fully complying with the DEP's regulations for wetlands, flood hazard area, and riparian buffers.
If we could, we identified that there's a stormwater management system that is coming. I'm going to ask if you could just executive summary. Detail on stormwater sometimes is painful, but executive summary. What is the nature of the stormwater system, and will it be compliant with the municipal requirements?
Right, it's just an underground storage system, a series of pipes underground to store the water and then let it release at a slower rate or a lesser rate than the current conditions.
In recent changes at the state level to stormwater regulations, an operations and maintenance manual is an obligation of a private developer, and that operations and maintenance manual must be recorded as a permanent lien against the property to assure that the private property owner and successors will maintain the stormwater system. Did your office prepare that operations and maintenance manual? Will you work with Mr. Cunliffe to make certain that it complies with his requirements?
Yes, we did, and it will comply with those requirements.
We could go to the parking and circulation, and similar to the environmental issues being restated shortly by Dr. Walker, the parking and circulation will also be revisited by Scott Kennel. But as the designer of this project, I'm going to ask if you could just take us around the parking lot that you've designed.
Sure, and maybe we can just go to A19 real quick.
If you describe to board members and the public what A19 is showing.
Sure, A19 is a vehicle circulation plan. It's the same plan that was submitted to the board in support of the application, sheet 4 of our plan set. We have just shaded the vehicle circulation path in gray to make it a little easier to see. And one can see that vehicles will be entering the site and they will have clear circulation around the site, access to the trash area and loading area, and then how they'd be able to exit the site.
Did you use the turning templates for the anticipated fire and emergency vehicles, the anticipated delivery vehicles, and the anticipated trash removal vehicles to create this exhibit?
Yes, we did. And we have also received review from the local fire bureau, who has taken no objections to the application or to the plan as presented.
And Mr. Chair, board members, I will share with you that I personally met with Fire Chief Lewis with this plan to review it with him and to make certain that the design was consistent with his requirements.
Mr. Pape?
Yes, sir.
So this is the flow as designed on the property. But as we know, this particular corridor from Ford Road down to County Line Road there's a lot of, you know, accidents, so to speak, you know, with people making left-hand turns across the highway into these spots. You know, with the increased intensity of the use of this particular site, are we going to be able to address some of this with the State Department of Transportation?
Mr. Chair, if I may, and I do not want to step on Scott Kennel's toes, but I want to answer that question fully. Mr. Kennel will discuss the DOT's jurisdiction and the application that is required. He will describe that the driveway location is in the same location, but that the design is going to be a 2022 modern design and not one from another generation. When we go to the DOT, we would be pleased to bring with us any communications, any guidance that this board or its staff has to the DOT, and to submit it to the DOT with our application. We acknowledge your concerns. We cannot make any decision without the DOT, but we would be pleased to bring your comments and concerns with us, and even go further. We'd be pleased to invite Mr. Cunliffe with Mr. Kennel when it goes down for the pre-application.
So, and to jump in here, Ken, and not to put words in the chairman's mouth, but I think what he's alluding at is, you know, one with turning into and out of the site driveway. You know, certainly I think that section of town, that corridor, the southern part of Howell, coming on Route 9 northbound, trying to make a left-hand turn, you know, across traffic is a very difficult traffic movement, even up at Ford Road, where there is a break in the double yellow line to make that left turn. So I think, you know, the board's recommendation would be, you know, subject to DOT approval, we'd like to see maybe a right turn out and right turn in only restriction on this site. You know, double yellow lines, I think obviously, you know, I don't think you can make a left-hand turn coming northbound through there, but any restrictions on exiting the site driveway and possibly any signage that they would allow at the entranceway restricting, you know, turns across, you know, the southbound lane into the site from a traffic safety perspective, I think would be a good thing. And Mr. Say, you can correct me if I'm wrong on any of that.
No, that's exactly what I'm referencing, Charlie. And of course, you know, Title 39 goes along with it, et cetera.
So, and then Mr. Payne, I just want to elaborate on some things too. So the exhibit that you're showing to the board right now, this is just for an SU-40 box truck, typical box truck. Is that right, Mr. McFarland?
Yes.
So is the applicant representing to the board that this is the largest size truck other than an emergency vehicle that would be coming into the site, no tractor trailer articulated vehicles?
Yes.
Yeah, there's no need for an articulated vehicle to enter this site. That's
And
correct.
just so the board is covered, would the applicant agree to a condition as stating such?
Yes,
Okay, and then you heard Mr. Say it's Title 39, and then this exhibit doesn't necessarily represent it, but I think your site plan does. Mr. McFarland, you provided striped fire lanes for all the circulation and signage, and you know, to the acceptability of the fire official.
Yes, we have.
Okay. And then the one comment that I just want to note, from a waiver perspective, our ordinance requires a 30-foot circulation aisle for all commercial applications. So it's not dimensioned on here, but the main driveway coming in and the lower, I'll say internal driveway in between the middle parking area and the parking area that abuts a building, that's 30-foot wide. The portions of that driveway going north-south on either end, the western and the eastern end, is also 30-foot wide. It's that northerly driveway aisle that's 25-foot wide. Our ordinance requires 30-foot. So they do need a waiver from that. Having said that, if they presented these to the fire official and he has found them acceptable, you know, I think we've seen applications where the board has, you know, as long as it's been acceptable to the fire official, has been amenable to granting that relief. So I just want to put it on the record. And then just to beat back into the stormwater management, because I think it's important for the board's perspective. So Mr. McFarland, when this was submitted to DEP, they looked at the application, the portion of the existing parking area that's to be resurfaced. So that's milled and then, you know, an overlay installed over top of it. That's a distinction in the new stormwater management rules where they don't call that as disturbance. So is it the applicant's commitment that there's no reconstruction of that pavement in that area?
Correct.
Okay, so, and then of the balance of the site, where it's reconstruction of the existing pavement and expansion of the parking area, it's your professional testimony that's under an acre disturbance, under a quarter acre of new impervious, and under a quarter acre of new regulated motor vehicle surface?
Yes,
And you'll revise, I think you had calculations on the plans for disturbance and impervious coverage. I just asked that both the stormwater report and the site plans add that calculation for regulated motor vehicle surface, just to complete the loop and satisfy the record.
yes. No objection.
That's all I have for right now, Mr. Chair. They can proceed.
Thank you,
Before we
Chad.
proceed, I just want, Mr. Chair, the concern that you raised about the driveway was one that we had considered during our design and preparation. And we came to a conclusion that it is the DOT that controls our driveway, and that the best way to get the DOT's attention and to do the right thing was to make an invitation to this board and its professionals to participate with us in the presentation to the DOT. That is your applicant's goal, and I hope I stated it accurately, or I hope I stated it clearly.
Thank you, Mr. Pape.
You're welcome, Chair.
So are we, Mr. Graham, does he have any more testimony?
He does. I have a little bit more on landscaping, lighting, and signage, and then we're prepared to present him to for cross-examination.
I actually have a question, if you don't mind if I jump in real quick about the pavement before we move on.
Mr. Rubel, it's all yours. Go ahead, sir.
All right, thank you. I understand a portion of the existing pavement is being milled and repaved. There's a reconstruction portion. Has there been any investigation as to the condition of the existing pavement? Pavement typically has a 20-year service life, and if this building has been vacant for over 25 years, are you confident that if you mill and repave, whatever is left beneath that zone is competent to take the vehicle loading that you're planning on impacting it with? I understand it's to get the disturbance down, but I just wanted to make sure you thought that through, because I'm assuming some of that is in the entranceway there, where you're going to have the most traffic and the most pounding on the pavement there.
Right, these will all be light duty vehicles, passenger vehicles and light duty trucks. We don't, we're not subject to any heavy truck loading. And while the existing pavement surface is not in great condition, it's actually not failing terribly in structural terms, more so just just wear conditions and frankly lack of adequate drainage within the existing parking area. So we're confident that when we mill and resurface this, and we'll get a little bit of grade achieved on this to get the stormwater running where it's supposed to go to the inlets, that it's all going to work out just perfectly fine.
Okay, thank you.
I think, Mr. I want to say your name correct, Rubel or Rubel?
Rubel.
Mr. Rubel, I think that we could go one step further, and as long as it's not an imposition on Mr. Cunliffe, we could have Mr. Cunliffe conduct an inspection of the parking lot areas before the milling and after the milling to make certain that the structural integrity is in place before.
That's what I was getting at. I mean, I do this a little bit in my work, and typically you'll do some pavement cores in an existing parking lot if you plan on reusing it, just to check the section depth and do material testing on it if you plan on using it moving forward. So that would be agreeable if there was someone to inspect it or perform some testing on it to check the section depth.
Mr. McFarland has indicated that's acceptable, and on behalf of our client, I'll indicate it's acceptable, as long as it's acceptable to Mr. Cunliffe.
Yeah, so what I'll just add to that is anytime we get an application, we do go to the site, take photographs, do some due diligence. So there is definitely some cracking in the pavement section. Visually, there was nothing that we observed where it was like alligator cracking, or that there was excessive settlement where, someone's showing that they're going to resurface a parking lot, and we would just say, no, that's not acceptable. Cool. So what they've shown, it looks like it can be achieved. Having said that, the board can require conditions prior to any construction permits. The applicant has to do paving coring for the township engineering department's review and approval. If there is any need because of insufficient pavement thickness or anything like that for the pavement area to be reconstructed, they would have to return back to the board because, like I said, the major development determination for this application is based on that area as milling and paving is not considered as disturbance. If they were to have to mill that up, put in new DGA base course, HMA base course, surface course, that would now be disturbance under the new stormwater management rules, which would kick this into a major development. And there's a lot more, stringent rules required with the stormwater management. So we can certainly, include language in a resolution requiring those, additional checks and, on the application.
Understood. No, I'm not trying to throw a monkey wrench in anything. I just want to make sure it was looked at and thought about. And
Those
I'm
are
good.
all valid questions and concerns.
Yep. If we maybe proceed, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Pape, please proceed with Mr. Graham, and then after Mr. Graham is complete, we'll ask the board members if they have any questions.
Very good. If we could discuss the landscaping plan, and I think pretty quickly, we're going to go right to Shari Spiro's report and say a whole lot of will complies, but could you just describe to the board the nature of the landscape plan that is proposed?
Yes, and we did provide a landscaping plan with the set that does show street trees and some trees around the perimeter of the site. We are in receipt of Shari's letter that did point out some upgrades to the landscaping plan that are recommended and will agree to comply with all of her recommendations.
I wanted to share with all, when we were at the Environmental Commission last week, the chairwoman, Lisa Dowd, asked if we would incorporate indigenous plantings that included food sources for known foraging birds in this area. Lisa Dowd pointed out that the corridor, the Matiticon corridor, had a unique bird population. And she wanted us to focus on the foraging requirements of that bird population as part of the plantings, particularly the plantings on the western side of the property as they border the wetlands. And I promised Ms. Dowd that I would bring this to the attention of the board and indicate that the applicant will comply with that requirement subject to the board and Shari Spiro's acceptance of same.
Ms. Spiro?
Yeah, could you discuss the bamboo that's on the site? I'm not really sure if the DEP will require that removal, but it would be good if that could be controlled.
To control and or remove the existing bamboo that's there?
Yeah, so there's bamboo near Route 9 at the southern corner of the south eastern corner of the building.
Absolutely.
Okay, Mr. McFarland is telling me absolutely. So
Yeah, I mean, it's, it's a terribly invasive species and it should be removed. So we'll certainly indicate that on a plan, and that'll be a condition of the work.
So for the record, Ms. Spiro's report of July 21st, which we've had adequate opportunity to review, has under category 1, it includes A, B, C, D, and E. These are, I believe, recommendations. A appears to be a statement, but B, C, D, and E are recommendations for revisions. Mr. McFarland, we went through these and we will comply with all of those.
Yes.
And then number 2 is a list of technical comments. And again, we've gone through the technical requirements and without exception, the technical requirements are acceptable.
Agreed.
And then just we'll add in that one additional comment that we had made to the promise to Lisa Dowd that there would be that indigenous materials with foraging food for the bird population.
Was she referring to any particular species?
She did not. She just acknowledged that there is a unique bird population in this area, and she wanted us to use plantings to provide additional food supply for them.
Okay, just to keep in mind, it doesn't have to be fruiting trees. So something even like oaks that you already have proposed, they will have all sorts of worms in there, and that's what they feed their baby birds. So it doesn't have to be fruit trees.
We'll follow, as always, Shari, we'll work with you. I promised Lisa Dowd it would be on the record, and
No problem.
kept my commitment to her. Let's talk about lighting briefly.
Sure.
If you could just describe the type of lighting, the height of the fixtures, confirm shielding as part of the design, and that we're not going to have spillage.
Yes, the plan calls for a series of pole mounted lights. I do see that our light poles are indicated as 25 foot high, where I believe ordinance provides 24 foot maximum. But frankly, I'll defer to whatever the pleasure of the board is. If the board feels strongly that they don't want us to encroach upon that height, we'll revise the plan, limit it down to 20 or 24 foot high poles. That would have to look at the fixture location a little bit, but if the board has an objection, we'll agree to make that change. If not, we'll keep the 25 foot. So however the board feels about that. Of course,
I would recommend, if I could just, hold on, can I just, Mr. Chair, it's a foot difference. I think they should comply. Yeah, so I would submit that it should be 20 feet.
We'll agree to comply with a maximum of 20 to 24 foot height. So there will be slight adjustment to what you see on this plan as it is currently presented. But there are all LED light fixtures, and of course there would be lighting proposed at all of the doorways as required by the building code.
The last topic I'm going to ask is signage, not building signage, but ground mounted signage. If you could describe the one sign that's proposed, its location, and confirm that it's the intention of the applicant to be in full compliance with the sign ordinance.
Yes, well, we do have one freestanding sign proposed. It is located at the main driveway at the front corner of the building. It is located 24 feet from the right-of-way line. It is located outside of the NJDOT desirable typical section. However, there is one variance requested for the sign. The way that your ordinance is written, the ordinance really anticipates more along the lines of pole mounted signs when it describes the sign requirements, where it says you have a ground sign or a freestanding sign shall maintain a 10-foot minimum clearance from property lines and a 7-foot clearance from established grade. And we're not proposing a sign of that type. This is an office building, not a retail building. We're proposing a sign that would be 2 feet off of the ground, just to allow some landscaping to be planted beneath the sign, and then have the sign, the sign bottom begin 2 feet above the grade. So technically that I believe is a variance requested, and we would like to request that relief with the application.
Jen?
I have no problem with that.
Okay.
It's different when you have a retail center or what have you, and someone's traveling down the highway looking for the facility. This is going to be an office building, so the people that are going there on a regular basis will know where they're going. I mean, I'm assuming every now and then you'll have visitors, but by and large, I would say 99% of the people going there will be people that are working there. And so I don't see the need to have more sign clutter. I think this is a more aesthetic alternative.
Got it. Thank you.
Mr. McFarland, my last questions of you are as follows. If you could just share with the board over the last few months that there have been multiple meetings, whether they were Zoom or phone or in person, with the board's professional staff. I personally like to thank the staff for the generous time that they spent on this application with us. But if you could confirm that you participated in those, that before tonight you had the opportunity to receive and review the current staff reports, if you could indicate to the board your intention to comply with the remaining technical requirements that are in those reports.
Yes, those statements are all accurate, and we'll agree to comply with any technical comments in the reports.
Mr. Chair, that concludes the direct presentation of Graham McFarland's testimony. He is now available to the board and board's professionals for examination.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, board members, I'll go right down the list.
Mr. Say, can I just ask one question before you go there?
Yes, ma'am.
So in our letter, we also identified, I know Charlie in a very detailed summary, and your exhibit went through all of the environmental buffers and stream corridor, riparian, et cetera. You also have a very slim, sliver of a required residential buffer, because lot 4, which is several lots over on Ford Road kind of wraps around and touches your property where it's like at the river, basically. So I just wanted to put on the record, so technically you need that 50-foot residential buffer, but I also wanted the board to be aware that it's entirely encumbered with environmentally sensitive areas, and therefore, they could put a line on a plan, but there's absolutely no ability to develop there either. So I would take no exception. I mean, I'm not usually one to say, okay, but in this particular instance,
Probably. Yeah.
Could we put up A20 so that what Ms. Beam just described is, I think,
I think it's totally wet.
A14. I think A14, I know what you're describing, but I think it'd be beneficial for the board to see
Up.
A14. Yeah.
There's no A14.
Yeah, I don't see A14.
Yeah.
There's a B14.
That's B.
How about A17? Let's try A17. Yes, as you look at A17, the bottom left corner of the site. And who's in charge here? Charlie's in charge?
John, do you want to put the arrow at our site?
Right there,
there.
yeah.
Right there.
That bottom left corner of the site, that has a common property line with lot 4 for a very short distance. I don't have the exact dimension, but it's on the order of 50 feet or so. There's a question as to exactly where the zone boundary is. I don't believe the zone boundary is along the property line. I believe it's west of the property line from.
The issue though is that
But it's
the site
kind
is
of hard-
zoned,
it's
the
kind of
lot
hard
is
to
zoned ARE, respectfully, the site is zoned ARE2. I don't think it's a big issue because it's totally wet and within the riparian buffer and they're not touching it. But our ordinance says any lot that's residentially zoned or has a residential use on it, and that lot is zoned ARE2. So I don't have a problem with the relief. I think you should seek the relief and get it from the board because God knows what'll happen at some other point in time. But I just want the board to be aware that it's within that environmentally sensitive area that's regulated by the DEP. So even if he wanted to disturb that 50 feet, he wouldn't be able to. And it's also important to note that that finger is all environmentally constrained as well as it heads back to lot 4. So the residential use that the quote unquote buffer is protecting is far, far away from this property line. But I just wanted to make sure it was on the record and it was clear so that when Andy puts together the resolution, it's included in whatever he's going to do if the board acts favorably on the application.
Duly noted, greatly appreciated. I hope that the exhibit that Graham just put up assists the board in understanding just where it occurs.
Okay.
Mr. Say, if I could just run through some stuff in my letter, I want to get to the butt of it with Mr. McFarland before we get to the board's questions. So I'll let Jen, when we get to the planning, talk about and the architecturals about the height and how that relates to the use variance and all that kind of stuff. As far as waivers, they do need a waiver of exceeding the maximum average for light intensities in a parking area. That's a result of LED. We've seen that on numerous commercial type applications along Route 9, and the board has granted that before, so I take no exception to that. Loading space. So the one they're providing adjacent to their trash refuse enclosure doesn't meet the ordinance requirements. The ordinance requires a 10 foot by 60. Theirs is approximately 10 by 36 feet. What I will say is the applicant has agreed to a condition that loading area and circulation on the site would be limited to SU40. So I take no issue with the granting of that waiver. If we had tractor trailer traffic coming to here, then that would be something I'd be more concerned about. As far as they need a waiver from streetscape design principle. So anything along the public right of way where you have access, sidewalks and such from the public right of way, our ordinance requires, benches, street furniture, bike racks. Ken, is there any ability for the applicant to provide some kind of, bike rack maybe at the sidewalk linking the right of way to the site just for promote pedestrian bicycle circulation to the site?
Yes, and I think that the best way is for the applicant to state yes it can be incorporated, and we'll work with you, Jennifer, and Shari to figure out the best location for that.
Okay, and then with the stormwater management, obviously, Mr. McFarland, you put representation, any technical comments that are outstanding, you can address as a condition of the approval. The couple of things that I do just want to touch on, obviously, Mr. Pape talked about the O&M manual being recorded by deed. I think that's a positive thing, even though this isn't a major development. As far as the detention system proposed for the site, if that can be sloped even minimally, 0.1%, just for maintenance purposes. So that way, if there is any sediment and debris collecting on the low ends of the system, that might assist with maintenance down the line. Also something for the board to consider, while this isn't a major development, and there isn't a water quality requirement per se, any additional features that the applicant can provide for the stormwater management infrastructure for water quality purposes, I don't know that it needs to be a full-born manufactured treatment device because this isn't a major development, but any of the inlets on the site, maybe they can be provided with sumps for collection purposes to aid in the additional capture of debris and sediment for maintenance purposes. I think that would be a positive for this system. Is that something, Ken, the applicant would be amenable to?
Judge, we'll agree to either that or inlet filters to the extent that they comply with any concerns or requirements of the DEP permits that have been issued.
Okay, I think that's acceptable language. Just to talk about, and I know Mr. Kennel is going to get on here with traffic. I just want to note the parking. So the applicant's requirement in accordance with our Howell Township ordinance is 93 parking spaces. They're providing 90 parking spaces on site. However, 3 of the parking spaces are EV parking spaces. The state statute that was adopted last year gives the applicant a credit for EV parking spaces on a 2-to-1 ratio. So they're providing 90 parking spaces, 3 of which are EV. So you get a 2-to-1 credit. So they're meeting the parking requirement with 93 with that, 2-to-1 credit. The one comment I do have about that is the EV charging laws do allow the applicant to install, the spaces incrementally over time. You can make one of the 3 at time of site plan as a permanent EV installation. You can install all the guts for the other 2, at time of site plan. 3 years later, come in and install the next to make it fully EV compliant. My recommendation would be, board, make it cleaner. Let's avoid all that. I think a condition requiring them to put on all the equipment up front would be beneficial, just from a township perspective, not having to chase down that loop down the line. Is that something, Ken, the applicant would be amenable to?
Graham?
Yes, we agree with that.
And just depicting on the site plan a basis of design, make, and model, so that way it's easy for the construction officials to make sure that what's being installed is in accordance with the approval. Last thing about circulation, and I'll let Mr. Kennel touch on this too. Can we put the circulation exhibit up real quick again? I think it's A19. So you got a pretty wide, 30-foot wide site driveway. Has the applicant given any consideration in that triangular wedge between the turning movements to maybe putting in like a mountable, curb island or something like that, just to more clearly delineate the in and out traffic?
Mr. Cunliffe, I think that the appropriate response is to say, if that's part of the recommendations of the board for us to take to the DOT, we certainly have no issue with it, but we did not show any improvements in the DOT right of way. That's going to be part of the application.
Mr. Say, I think that would be a recommendation of the board and a condition of the approval. A triangular island that has some curvature for the turning movements would more, clearly, along with signage, indicate right in, right out only for traffic safety purposes. So I think we should require that. And then to the signage, obviously the board and Jen, I think, took no issue with the height from the bottom of the sign to grade. I just want Mr. McFarland to put on the record. You've provided a site triangle exhibit on the plan, and that's anywhere in vicinity to that site triangle, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so there's no issues from a sight line perspective. The lighting, the applicant already revised the plans regarding the color, temperature, downward facing, house side shield, so that's acceptable. I just want to clarify, there's conflicting notes on the timing of the lights. There was one note that said dusk till dawn. There was another one that said to 10 p.m. Can you give some clarity on that, Mr. Pape, on what the applicant exactly is seeking? You know, I just want it clear so that way it's easy for the township to enforce down the line.
I think that the best way to approach the lighting is to indicate that we would like the lighting to be 30 minutes after the last employee leaves, which we anticipate would be no later than 10 o'clock in the evening, because this is a general office building. So that is the request. And we would defer to the board and the town's professionals as to whether there should be, because they're LED, there's the opportunity to have less of the lights on and to have them dimmed. If there was a security measure of lighting that you would recommend for the overnight, we'd have no problem complying with that. But the intention is 30 minutes after the close of business, which the latest, which would be 10 o'clock, is the statement of the applicant.
No, I think that's acceptable language from the board's perspective. I just wanted it to be clear what exactly was on the table for them. And then I'll talk with the environmental when Mr. Walker gets on. I just want to also clarify the utilities to the site. So the site existing is on well and septic. The applicant, as a condition of any approval, is going to have to get Monmouth County Board of Health certificate of abandonment. They did note in their memo for this application that if the septic system does have to be removed instead of abandoned, there's, you know, additional permits that are required on that. Just remind the applicant they're required to do that. And then just for the board's record, the applicant is tying into public water in Route 9. So they'll have to obtain any DOT and New Jersey American Water permits and approvals, road opening, all that kind of stuff for those infrastructure. And then as far as public sanitary sewer, there is a force main, or I believe a gravity main, available at the northeast corner of the site that was installed with the pump station application across the street years ago. The applicant is proposing to connect to that. Can you give us some information, Mr. McFarland, on where the applicant is with all that whole process with the township?
We've made application, preliminary application. The town doesn't have hasn't taken any objection to it. And, you know, of course, if we get the approval tonight or whenever, we'll follow up with that.
Okay. And Mr. Pape, there were some comments in the fire official's memo about reviewing building for sprinklers, upsizing the main to the site to 4-inch, also providing an on-site fire hydrant. The applicant is amenable to addressing those concerns.
Yes, Graham and I went over that in detail. The on-site fire hydrant will be shown. We'll ask Chief Lewis where it's to be located. It's not in his memo. The building is fully suppressed, and upgrading the water supply line to handle the firefighting requirements. We're all good, right? We're all good?
Yes.
Yep.
And then just the last two comments on the utilities. And we've seen it come up in the past. The water service, you know, I just want to put on the record, if it's a hot box above grade and it's in the front yard area, technically that would be an accessory structure. So you'd have to come back to the board for the amendment of that approval. There's no anticipation that that's going to be required. And then also for like any site electric, is there any anticipation of any above ground cabinet?
I have no idea at this time.
So, and Ken, what I will say is I don't know how the rest of the night's going to go and timing and things like that. But if we do not wrap up tonight and there's any inclination that that might be an eventuality, it would be in the applicant's best interest to just show that on an exhibit now and get approval for it, to not have to come back to the board if there's any eventuality that could potentially happen.
Duly noted.
All right. That's all I have right now, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Charlie. Okay, fellow board members. Mr. Mertens, do you have any questions?
Yeah, could Mr. McFarland, could you just expand the site? I just was curious about the refuge area, because looking at the plan, I really can't see the layout of it. And I just wanted to make sure, you know, our planner was comfortable with it.
I was just going to say, perhaps if we can zoom in on that area on this plan. You could zoom in a little further too, if you don't mind. You could see. I think Eileen's got control, if I'm not mistaken. She did zoom in.
That's fine now.
Whoever it is did zoom in on that area on this circulation plan, and it does show that we provide an area for trash dumpsters as well as recyclables. which I believe is going to be adequate for, for this type of office use. Trying to get the dimensions for you, just to give you.
It's a masonry enclosure, which is what we typically ask for. There's gates in the front, but obviously they have to access the masonry enclosure somehow. I'm comfortable, because we do always recommend the masonry as opposed to like the chain link fence, et cetera. But also it's as far to the west as you possibly can get, pretty much, and still be accessible from a garbage truck. And so, what you would see, if you could see it at all, is, past the cars that are parked there, is masonry, because the opening is like to the north. So I don't have any problems with the enclosure.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm comfortable too. It's only because it's an environmental sensitive area. Now that I know it's masonry enclosure, I'm more comfortable with it. I just didn't want any debris flying all over the place, especially in a sensitive area like this. Okay, I'm good.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cantor.
Mr. Chairman, it was mentioned that there was testing on the parking lot and the integrity of the existing parking lot and the construction. The reason why this building is abandoned is because it flooded, and it's significant flooding. So, and I think it was covered, but are we confirming that we're checking the whatever's underneath the parking lot to make sure that it's going to be appropriate?
Mr. Graham?
Yes, we did have some discussion on that previously. We're agreeing to follow the recommendations of both your board member and your professional staff, and that after the surface is milled, it would be inspected, and then if there are any upgrades needed, they would be done at that time.
Thank you. Yeah, that's kind of what you said. Thank you.
Sure. Mr. Hughes?
I think I'm good at this time, Mr. Chair.
Roger, thank you. Mr. Moretti?
Nothing at this time, Mr. Chair.
Great. Mr. Stanton?
Out of curiosity, how many proposed units are in the building?
Well, Katie Flores, our architect, is probably the only one amongst us who can answer that accurately. So we'll make sure that question goes to her, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Pape.
Sure.
Okay. Mr. Rubel, excuse me.
Nothing further at this time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Hey, Mr. Pape, what time do we have?
8:30.
It's 8:30.
Why don't we take 10 minutes and come back at 8:40 and for the next professional?
Mr. Chair, that's fine. Thank you so much.
Eileen?
The meeting will now take a 10-minute break. We will reconvene at 8:37.
Thank you.
The meeting will now reconvene.
Pick up the paintbrush.
Mr. Pape.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair.
So who do we have up next?
We have Dr. Walker up next. Raymond Walker is our environmental scientist. And I think we've certainly built up his responsibilities. If we could have him admitted. I don't see him in. Eileen, there we go. Ray Walker is in. And if we could have him sworn, and then we'll go through his credentials before his testimony.
Mr. Bear?
Yes. Mr. Walker, can you raise your right hand? Do you swear that the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
State your name for the record, spell your last.
Raymond Walker, W-A-L-K-E-R.
Still yours, Mr. Pape.
Thank you. Dr. Walker, if you would take a few moments, and we've been before this board and your credentials have been shared, but I think they belong on the record. Would you take a few moments to share your education and professional background with the board?
I have a BS in environmental biology from Manhattan College. I have a PhD in ecology from Rutgers University. I was employed for approximately 4 years as a regulatory specialist and chief of surveillance and enforcement with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers out of Philadelphia, administering different provisions of the Clean Water Act. I've been associate or adjunct professor at a number of colleges in New Jersey, teaching courses in ecological sciences. And for the last 35 years, I've been employed as a environmental consultant with two engineering firms in New Jersey, the most recent one being Collier's Engineering and Design. I've been certified as an environmental expert in federal court, state court, multiple jurisdictions in New Jersey, zoning boards, planning boards, in addition to this board.
Dr. Walker, thank you for putting that on the record. I'm sure Mr. Rebel appreciates it because he's new to the board and he hasn't probably had you sit in front of him before. We certainly do accept your credentials and we're looking forward to your testimony, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Walker, I think the exhibit that you'd like to rely on is the one prepared and presented earlier this evening.
Actually, I want to start with A19.
Okay.
Start with A19.
That's the vehicle circulation plan?
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
but there's information on that that's hasn't really been brought up to the board yet. We could just scroll out a little bit. And scroll there. There you go. Okay. So just a little bit of history. If you look at historical aerials for this property, you'll see that there's been a building on this property since at least 1931. That's the latest aerial you can really access to see it. But it's the same location that the building's at now. There was an old wooden building in 1931. There were some improvements to that building, expanded its size, expanded the parking area. It looks like it was mainly a dirt parking area during the 1950s. And it looks like sometime around 1963, there was a paved or crushed stone parking lot put in the location where the current parking lot is right now. Since 1972, you don't see much in terms of significant improvements to the site. There might be a minor improvement here or there, a small shed or a little bit of paving or something. But for the most part, the property has been the same way it is right now since about 1972. So that's about almost 50 years it's been in this condition.
So Dr. Walker, 1970 is when the township of Howell actually established its zoning and planning boards. Prior to that, it was run by Tinton Falls. So that kind of coincides with that date.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's always interesting to look at historic aerials to kind of understand a property and its prior uses and stuff. So, as was already mentioned, it's adjacent to the Metedeconk River, and the Metedeconk River has been classified as a Category 1 water by the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. And under those rules, it's assigned a 300-foot riparian buffer. Also under the township ordinance, it's recognized as a Category 1 water, and it's also assigned a 300-foot riparian buffer. The property, wetlands on the property were identified, and I don't think we really discussed them, but if you look at this plan, you'll see that that stippled area, that crosshatch area, is the location of the wetlands on the property. To the west and to the south primarily. There's a little finger that comes up into the middle. You can see that there. And then there is that dashed line that's about 50 feet off of the wetlands line. That's the 50-foot wetlands buffer on the property. An LOI was issued for the property in 2019, and it classified the wetlands on the property as intermediate resource value, which means they would have an associated 50-foot transition area. There are no threatened or endangered species on the property. A natural heritage program database search was performed. The only species reported to be occurring on the site is the great blue heron for foraging in the Metedeconk River, but that's not a threatened or endangered species. And it's pretty common. It forages in pretty much any open waters in the state right now. The site also is almost entirely consists of floodplain. The only areas that are not designated within the floodplain is the building area itself, because it has walls around it. So, it floods, but not, it represents an impediment to floodwaters. And then the other area is located in the northwest corner where that parking lot's being proposed for expansion. There's a high knoll in that area that's outside the flood hazard area. But for the most part, most of the rest of the property, the frontage of the property is outside the flood hazard area. But the frontage, the building itself, and that knoll in the northwest corner are all located outside the flood hazard area. The other thing I want to draw your attention to is you can see the tree line on the property. That's that little squiggly line. And you can see that most of the wooded area or forested area there, that area there, are located to the west of the property, western part of the property. The area to the south is not wooded, but it is grassland, it's wetlands. But the areas that are out, you'll see that mostly, well, all the improvements that occur on the property are outside of any forest area, with the exception of that little triangular piece that you see up near the extension of the parking lot in the north central part of the property. There's a small little triangular piece of woods there. In addition to the letter of interpretation that was issued for the property, we also have a verification of the flood hazard area of the property from the DEP. And we secured certain permits and approvals from the DEP. We secured a freshwater wetlands transition area waiver. You can see that part of the new building encroaches into the 50-foot buffer, but that encroachment's within an existing parking lot area. So we had a transition area waiver for redevelopment for that part of the property. There's other small areas where the development encroaches into the transition area, and those are mainly areas that were previously developed. In addition, which isn't shown on here, there's also a stormwater outfall that's going to convey the stormwater from the water quality treatment system on the site, and that will be discharging to the Metedeconk River, and that was authorized under general permit number 11. And in addition to the wetland permits, we have a number of permits from the DEP, mainly for encroachments into the riparian zone. Under the state program, within the riparian zone, the state only regulates the disturbance or removal of vegetation. So even though a large part of that parking lot falls within the state's riparian zone, it's not vegetated, so it doesn't really fall under their provisions. So that's not really counted as an impact under their rules. But there are other areas where we were allowed minor encroachments into the riparian zone to facilitate this proposed development. And then, Ken, I think now I want to go to A20.
Yes.
So the way I kind of like to think of this is because this property's been developed for such a long time, I kind of look at it as, under the environmental rules, it's maybe a pre-existing non-conforming use under the environmental regulations. You know, it was there before the stream corridor rules, the stream corridor buffer, and the riparian rules were implemented. If you look at this, it was already discussed, but there's a couple of what we call pre-existing non-conforming features. One is, if you look at that lower right-hand part of the building, it's that little triangular piece, that occurs within about 10 feet of the Metedeconk River. And in addition, you can see that the area that's stippled in, I guess I would call it butterscotch, encroaches into the stream corridor area. And again, as was testified earlier, the area in blue is existing encroachments into the stream corridor buffer, and the area in pink is areas that are encroaching into the 300-foot riparian buffer. As was discussed before, the intent of this development plan was to try and move as much of these encroachments as far away from the more environmentally sensitive parts of the site as possible. So we moved the building further to the north so that the closest structure or impervious surface is now 25 feet from the top of bank in the Metedeconk River. The main new encroachments that we have are really in that what DEP calls is the outside riparian zone. Under DEP rules and regulations, they kind of divide that 300-foot riparian zone into an inner zone and an outer zone. The inner zone being the first 150 feet, the outer zone being the outer 150 feet. So a lot of our encroachments were located more in that outer zone in areas that were previously developed. Overall, there's going to be a net increase of approximately 2,718 square feet of new impervious surface. Again, we'll be removing impervious cover and surfaces within the stream corridor. We'll be adding new impervious surfaces in the outer part of the riparian buffer that with the addition of that new parking lot, expansion of the parking lot. And the only, when we're encroaching into that outer 300-foot, outer 150-foot buffer, the only area of vegetation that we're really disturbing is that little triangular piece of woods. That's about 425 square feet. All the other encroachments are in areas that were previously disturbed, and DEP provides you with certain permits that allow you to develop in previously disturbed areas within the riparian zone. So that's where we kind of focused our development activities. All the disturbances you see within the riparian zone are below DEP's allowable limits, so we comply with all DEP standards as it relates to this project and the riparian zone under the flood hazard rules. As was mentioned before, the existing building is going to be raised, so the first floor will be 1 foot above the base flood elevation. So, as was indicated before, the current building does flood because of its current elevation. So that's going to be elevated above the base flood elevation. There's going to be a net increase in flood storage area because we are taking that upland knoll in that northwest corner of the property and turning it into a parking lot. We're actually excavating out area and creating additional flood storage area. So there'll be an additional 408 cubic yards of flood storage volume on this property once the development is completed. So we won't be aggravating any type of downstream flooding for downstream neighbors. And then approximately 8,700 square feet of the new parking lot is going to be vegetated or landscaped, whereas right now there is no landscaping or vegetation on the parking lot. So again, the overall intent here was to move the development away from the Matitaquag River and do it in such a manner that we complied with DEP's wetland rules as well as their flood hazard and riparian rules. And again, to try and provide as much relief from the town's stream corridor and stream corridor buffer rules also.
Dr. Walker, if it's not too much of an imposition, could you catalog the permits that you have secured for the client? Just go through them on the record.
Sure. Well, again, we have the letter of interpretation verifying the wetlands line. We have a transition area waiver for redevelopment under the freshwater wetland rules. We have a freshwater wetland general permit for the stormwater outfall structure. And we have an individual flood hazard permit for various minor encroachments into the riparian zone.
And all of these permits have been issued and have been provided to the township prior to this evening's hearing.
Yeah, correct. The permits were issued on August 13th of 2020. The letter of interpretation was issued on May 30th of 2019. It remains valid until May 30th of 2024.
Thank you. And would it be an accurate statement that the applicant did in fact secure all the necessary DEP permits for the proposal before coming before this board to ask for this relief?
Correct.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I have nothing further of Dr. Walker. He is available to the board members and your professionals at this time.
Thank you. Dr. Walker?
Yes.
I have a question. The existing structure, it's being proposed that it will be demolished and removed. Does it contain any hazardous materials, asbestos, etc., in the existing building?
That I don't know. We did not do a phase 1 audit on the building, so I really can't answer that question. Typically what would happen is if you're going to demolish the building, you'll bring your demolition contractor in, he'll assess the building, determine if there's any hazardous materials in there. If there are, then he'll bring in the requisite team to, remove them and before his crew gets in, actually demolishes the building. But we didn't do any phase 1 on the building at this point.
Okay. And And then I have another question. Mr. Aguirre, are you on?
I am.
Are there any violations issued against the existing structure?
There currently are, with regards to boarding up the building. We've had, unfortunately, some homeless people enter the building and use it as shelter. I believe the Fire Bureau has also issued the same violation along those lines. In addition, we have several trailers that are parked on the property that need to be moved, and just garbage and debris and general maintenance of the property.
Thank you, Mr. Aguirre.
You're welcome.
Wow. Okay, so Charlie?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I think I really only have one question for Mr. Walker. So the site plans that were presented to the board show a sidewalk along the west, south, and east sides of the dwelling. We only received a reduced copy of the plans with the permits that were obtained by the applicant. And it's a scan and it's a reduced size, so it's very grainy. It's hard for us to see. Did your application include the installation of those improvements when you submitted to DEP? And if not, are they under any certain thresholds that would require, reapplication to DEP to amend those permits?
My understanding is those were not shown on the plan submitted to DEP. And so what we would need to do is one of two things. We would resubmit the plans to DEP showing those sidewalks to determine whether it's just a matter of them issuing a letter recognizing that these are revised plans that are now referenced in the permit that was issued, or the second would be they would require a modification to the permits. My understanding is that those encroachments would not exceed any of the thresholds or limits that are currently available under the wetlands rules or under the flood hazard rules.
So my recommendation, Mr. Say, is we just include language in the approval that the applicant, obtain any required, DEP letters or approvals for those additional sidewalk areas, just so it's clear for the board and for the record that everything's above board.
Absolutely.
With that, Mr. Pape.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question that was framed. I heard the representation, but what was the question?
No, was there any issues with the greenness condition? Obviously.
Oh, no, not at all. Yeah, okay, thank you.
And then I have just technical stuff in the letter, Ken, about revising the EIS to include additional clarifying conflicting informations. The applicant confident they can address all that as any condition.
Yes, that's correct.
That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Charlie. Jen, we're good with the sidewalks?
I'm good.
Okay. Fellow board members. Questions for Dr. Walker? Mr. Mertens?
No, I'm good. Thanks.
Mr. Cantor?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hughes?
Oh, sir, very thorough. I'm good. Thank you.
Mr. Moretti?
No, sir, not at this time.
Mr. Stanton?
No, sir, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Rubel?
Nothing further, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So, Mr. Bear, did we want to open it up to public for questions for the first two professionals that have testified? Or should we continue on and
Well, I guess,
next
I'm sorry, Mr.
professional?
Yeah, I guess that would depend on what the board's plan is for the rest of the evening. But I don't know how late we want to go or.
Well, we're going to go to 10 o'clock at least.
Right. Well, we could open to the public for the engineer and the environmental specialist.
You good with that, Mr. Pape?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, can I have a motion to open up to public for questioning of the environmental and the engineer only?
Motion to open to public.
Second it.
Mr. Hughes, Mr. Moretti. Roll call, Eileen.
Mr. Cantor,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
Yes.
Mr. Mertens,
Yes.
Mr. Moretti,
Yes.
Mr. Stanton,
Yes.
Mr. Rubel,
Yes.
and Chairman Saya.
Yes. Eileen, would you please make the announcement, open to public, and bring anyone in that has
Sure.
raised their hands?
The meeting will now open to the public. If you are calling in, you could press *9 to raise or lower your hand and *6 to mute and unmute yourself. There is no one from the public raising their hand.
Eileen, we'll give them a chance. We'll,
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I can just jump in real quick and explain, I think my camera's been going. Just in case, assure everybody of that.
Oh, you broke up when you were explaining it, so we understand.
Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know what's going on, but
All right,
I'm sitting here.
You're doing well. Okay, Eileen, how's it looking?
No one from the public is raising their hand.
No call-ins?
Mr. Chairman, motion to close. We are going to give the public another opportunity, so motion to close.
All right.
Second,
Eileen, roll call. We're closing the public.
Mr. Cantor,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
Yes.
Mr. Mertens,
yes.
Mr. Moretti,
Yes.
Mr. Stanton,
Yes.
Mr. Rubel,
Yes.
and Chairman Saya.
Yes. Okay, Mr. Pape, we're ready for your next professional.
Thank you.
Before,
Mr.
Mr. Pape, before you go on, with respect to Mr. Walker, Dr. Walker, I don't know that you said what you were qualifying him as an expert in, although I understand what his credentials are. Yeah, I don't think you said it. You may
Okay.
want to.
Yeah, fine. Dr. Walker is an environmental scientist, and that his qualifications were as an environmental scientist.
Okay, thank you. I just
You're
wanted the
very
record
welcome.
clear.
Sure. Dr. Walker, you comfortable with those two words to describe your life's achievement?
Sure.
Mr. Chair, board members, the next witness is Scott Kennel. Scott Kennel is the applicant's traffic expert responsible for he and his firm were responsible for the traffic report. After we have him sworn, and he has been before you so many times, I'll ask if you accept his credentials and allow him to testify as a traffic expert. And then we'll go right to the 3 or 4 traffic and parking issues.
And Mr. Bear, can you swear in Mr. Kennel, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kennel, do you swear that the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
State your name for the record, spell your last.
Sure. It is Scott Kennel, Kennel, with McDonough and Ray Associates, located at 1431 Lakewood Road, Manasquan. I'm a principal with McDonough and Ray Associates, which is a traffic and transportation consulting firm. I have over 35 years of experience in traffic and transportation planning, having testified in over 1,000 site plan applications, many before the Howell Township Planning Board and Zoning Board. And I've been qualified by the New Jersey Superior Court as a traffic expert on 4 land use matters.
Mr. Chairman, may Scott Kennel testify this evening as a traffic expert before this board?
We'll accept his credentials, Mr. Pape.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kennel, I'm going to ask that we talk about 3 topics, and if you think that there's anything further, but I'm going to ask that you talk about the parking and the adequacy of the parking. The board heard that we have 93 parking spaces, and 3 of those are a statutory credit. So physically, we have 90 parking spaces. And I'm going to ask if you could just speak to the adequacy of the parking. And I'm going to ask if you, from your traffic expert perspective, join with Mr. McFarland in his review of the on-site circulation as to its adequacy and safety. And then last, I'd like to talk about the driveway access and the DOT's jurisdiction over that. So we'd start with parking. Do you have a professional opinion that the 90 physical parking stalls that are on the site are adequate for our clients' requirements?
Well, yeah, it's my expert opinion that the 90 parking spaces are adequate, but it complies with the township ordinance. It also reflects the state statute as far as the EV credit. It is generally consistent with the ITE data. One I'll refer to is the average parking rate for a building of this size would require 65 to 70 spaces. And then their 85th percentile data shows that you would need parking at 3.3, and we're just shy of that. So based on the township ordinance, the ITE data, it's my expert opinion that the parking will be adequate for the proposed use.
And Mr. Chair, I asked that Scott Kennel have that testimony. The state statute that says that an applicant gets credit gets a 2-for-1 credit for an EV charging station, I think sometimes needs a little explaining. I wanted to make certain that it was our expert's opinion that the parking is adequate, notwithstanding and I'm going to call it the smoke and mirrors of the statute that says we have the right number.
Well, and I think I also like to add too, also given what we've been through the last 2 years of the pandemic, there's been a change in, parking patterns for office type uses. So given the fact that people have the opportunity to telecommute or work 2 or 3 days a week, it's my opinion that the proposed spaces proposed will be adequate given what we've experienced and how we're coming out of this pandemic.
And then subsequently, Mr. Kennel, with regards to electric vehicles, right? You're going to have 3 EV charging stations on this particular piece of property, should it be approved. So the electric vehicle operators, they have an app that shows where they can come and jump on if they need to charge their vehicle. So are we going to be mindful of the fact that EV spaces may be opened up to other persons that are not necessarily associated with the office building? Over.
Yeah. Mr. Sayo, if I may, on behalf of the applicant, it's a great point, and it's one that we've been discussing on this and other applications. And I think the very best answer is to say the applicant should make every attempt to be a good citizen to the general community. And if that works without further regulation, leave it at that. If it creates an issue, then the applicant will necessarily need to create parking restrictions and signage to keep people off the site. But I'd really like to lead with, let's try to be a good citizen first.
And then Mr. Pape, that also then ties in with the Title 39, correct?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
So as long as the applicant's willing to subscribe to Title 39, where the township can perform some law enforcement duties if necessary, then I believe we'll be okay.
Mr. Chair, I think the correct response is to say that if this board were to grant approval of this application, that we will notify the police department and make application to the governing body for Title 39 to be enforced on the site.
I guess the next item is relative to on-site circulation and the larger vehicles that would serve the site. As Mr. McFarland had testified and presented, the site has been designed to accommodate SU-30 design vehicles, which are consistent with box trucks, refuse vehicles, and the type of vehicles that would serve this type of use. It's not expected that there would be any tractor trailers that would serve the site when it's fully operational.
And you're comfortable that the design that Mr. McFarland has placed on the record this evening is safe and adequate?
Given the placement of the refuse area and the internal circulation, yes.
And last, I'm going to ask if you could talk about the driveway, the jurisdiction of the DOT, the location of the driveway and the design of the driveway. And then we'll talk a little bit about inviting the township's participation at the DOT.
Yes, well, let me first qualify and what's presented in the traffic study by our firm dated March 8, 2021. this type of use is expected to generate approximately 40 peak hour trips, and on a daily basis, approximately 310 trips. NJDOT threshold for a minor permit, which this qualifies, is for any development less than 500 trips. If we were speaking about the prior use, there would be the daily trips anywhere from 900 to 1,000, and that'd be a major. But this is considered a minor access because the site, as it's proposed, will generate less than 500 daily trips. But Mr. Pape is correct in the fact that this is under NJDOT jurisdiction. It'll be necessary to file an application for a modified driveway, modified use. And this type of development, because of the low traffic generation and the overall scheme of things, does not require a pre-application meeting. We can schedule that if that is the board's request, to present the board's recommendation for a write-in, write-out. And if that is the board's pleasure, my office can coordinate that and coordinate that with Charlie.
Thank you very much. So just repeating, Mr. Chair and board members, I'm going to ask that Mr. Kennel do follow the procedure of asking the DOT for a pre-application meeting. It's my understanding those are done generally virtually, and that the notice of that be given to Mr. Cunliffe so that he can participate and bring the message of the board to the DOT.
Thank you, Mr. Pape.
You're welcome. I have nothing further of Mr. Kennel. This one didn't have a whole lot of traffic issues. He's now available to the board and the board's professionals.
Okay, well, I have one question for Mr. Kennel. So we have the trash enclosure, and then we have the circular coming around. So it doesn't look like the waste hauler can get perpendicular to the container enclosure. So there's it seems to me, it's gonna be a little bit of a, a curvature coming in. So how do we see that working?
Well, I think, again, what Mr. McFarland was trying to show is how they can circulate through the drive aisles that's been designed. I mean, they would enter, if it's a front-loading refuse vehicle, they would make a right turn into the site and circulate to the northerly circulation aisle, and then proceed to the westerly part of the parking lot, and then just proceed directly southbound direction right into where the enclosure is. And then once they pick up the refuse, they would just back up in a northerly direction to turn left to exit the site. I mean, this design, in my opinion, is very generous, and it can accommodate a refuse vehicle.
Okay.
They might not be staying in those charcoal lines, but they can do exactly what you just described.
Yeah, Mr. Say, that what they're depicting on this exhibit would be more typical of like a side loader. A front end, if you're looking at the left-hand side of this picture, you see the arrows, the direction of traffic. They'd be able to just come in perpendicular to the refuse enclosure, back up, and then make a left-hand turn, in the similar path that's being shown for the remainder of that stretch there.
Charlie?
Yes.
I understand. I just can picture the driver having to get out, pull the dumpster out, line it up in order to load it up onto the vehicle and dump the trash. I'm hoping that's not the case.
Well, should he have to do that? I mean, it's a very short-term event. I mean, it's less than 5 minutes, so I don't think it would have any negative impact on the site activity.
Understood. All right, Mr. Cunliffe, do you have any questions for the traffic engineer?
Yeah, there was just conflicting information in the traffic report. I think when this was originally done, it was based off of a 3-story, 27,000 plus or minus square foot building. The architectural plans currently have a 4-story, like a partial, like I'll call it a penthouse space, and then like a roof terrace. And Mr. Pape, maybe you might be able to elaborate. I know there was a agreement that the applicant would reduce the height of the structure from 65 down to 52, was it? Is
Yeah.
that being obtained by eliminating any activity in a terrace and the roof, or how is that being achieved?
That'll be for Katie Flores, but there's no change to the activity. It's being achieved by reducing the height of each of the floors and reducing the space between the floors. Ms. Flores can go through that.
So that being said, so the concern that I have from the board's perspective is they're coming in for a site plan approval and a use variance for, 4-story office, and they get an approval. And when we get to the architectural plans, it'll become more apparent, but the 4-story is a partial mezzanine with open roof area. What's the proposed activities and operations for that roof area? Is it, like for lunchtime purposes, employees want to go up there and eat and stuff like that? Longer term, right? This site's going to get, if it gets approved, there's a number of permitted uses in the zone. If the applicant or a future property owner came back to the town and wanted to convert, one of these floors to, a microbrewery or restaurant or this or that, there's a number of permitted uses. How does that long-term impact the parking? If there's any conditions that the applicant would be amenable to these space only being utilized for office purposes and accessory to that, I think that would be beneficial for the board's perspective and from code enforcement perspective. And then just the last question I would have is, is there any intent to have corporate type of events where you might have more than your typical daily office activity coming to the site and hosting events on the roof where your parking demand might be, 50% higher or double what your normal demand would be on a working day?
Well, when Ms. Flores has the floor, we'll go through all of that, but I think that you'll be pleased with the answers. It's intended to be an amenity for the office tenants.
Okay. And then just the last two things, obviously, like Mr. Kendall said, this is DOT as far as the access, they put on the record that they're getting any permits. Should the board like me to be present for any pre-app or meetings with DOT, I can certainly do that. And then Mr. Kendall, if you could just talk about level of service of the driveway in and out, whether you did any analysis of turning into the site and whether, any conditions prohibiting left turns into the site would alleviate those, concerns.
Well, again, the report that we published back in March of 2021 considered the site access as a full movement. And it resulted in a level of service C in the morning, which again would have permitted left turns out as well as right turns at 19 seconds of delay. And then the afternoon, it was a D level of service at approximately 34 seconds of vehicle delay. If we're making this a right in, right out, I haven't run the analysis, but I would expect it would be a level service C for both, and that the driver would function properly. Again, we have the benefit of Alexander Road to the north, that the traffic signal there creates platoons of traffic. So that in itself creates gaps for exiting traffic.
So those C and D, they're still within the acceptable limit for DOT, but it's your representation by imposing a no left turn out of the site. It's going to be improved to level of service C for both conditions.
Yes.
Okay. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
The kennel. So Alexander Road, we have the turnaround if you're coming northbound side, right? So you can get around and you can make the left-hand turn and you can get into the site. How do people who are past the site want to get to the site? Where's that turnaround down by County Road or County Road, or what's the other one, Kennedy?
Well, Kennedy Boulevard. They'll have to use the existing public street network to make a U-turn. I mean, they'll have to go down and way I would see it is they would make a right turn on County Line Road, go to 14th Street, make a right turn on Kennedy Boulevard. It's circuitous, but that's what happens when, there are no other formal U-turn facilities and left turns exiting the site are prohibited.
And that's the problem that we have in this area of town, where we butt up against our neighbor Lakewood. And, the traffic, it becomes a little audacious, eh? And so, when we go to the DOT, Charlie, can we also petition them to, at least get it on the docket that we object to the fact that there is no turnaround, and what we have to do, you pass the site in order to get back around?
We can certainly represent those concerns to the DOT, but what they do in their right of way is their jurisdiction. And we'd like to think that they rely on municipal and county input, but at the end of the day, it's ultimately their decision on what they do with their piece of property.
Oh, absolutely.
And I would say that may work against you to a certain extent. If you show that it's too circuitous, well, then they may not be as much in favor of a left turn prohibition. So, it's a balancing act.
Yes, there is, but they did assist us with the Lanes Mill / Route 9 intersection.
Oh,
And we've made a couple of improvements over time there
oh.
where they recognized the need for it. And we had the land to do it, and we did it. And then over at Estelle, we widened the turnaround. So is there any opportunity, that's what I want to put on the docket, Charlie, that's all.
And I'm very familiar with Greenleaf because my firm was involved in that. So I'm very familiar with those improvements, but I think going into Lakewood, into Ocean County, there's limited opportunities other than utilizing the existing roadway network.
Got it. Okay, Jen, anything for the traffic?
No, Mr. Chair, I don't have any questions for Mr. Kennel.
Okay, fellow board members, anyone?
No, Mr. Chair.
I'm good, sir.
Okay,
All the questions I had have been asked, and answered, so I'm good.
Mr. Rubel,
I'm good, thanks.
I'm good.
Mr. Moretti's good, Mr. Stanton's good. Billy, you're muted. Oh.
What's wrong?
You got the little one there. Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. They've been in and out all night. We had a problem with the AC upstairs, so everybody's downstairs tonight. I apologize.
Hey, Billy, you're familiar with this area. So, do you have any questions relative to the traffic engineer there?
So, my only concern is really if, like you guys said, if you pass if you leave and exit southbound, how are you making a U-turn? The only way to turn around to head back north up 9 is going to be to go into Lakewood, which could be very cumbersome, especially at certain times of day. I travel that corridor repeatedly throughout the day, and it's a little difficult, and you're adding a lot of traffic. Or you have the potential to add a lot of traffic, depending on how many units. You have 90 parking spots. It could add up.
Yeah. Charlie, something needs to be done. Not saying that we have the answer.
I'm not sure there is much to be done, though, Mr. Chair. It's a different county. It's a different municipality. It's kind of like the last piece of property in Howell Township.
Yeah. I got you.
can say, Mr. Say, is if I'm asked to attend that meeting, if there is a pre-application meeting, I will relay these concerns to the DOT, and I am hopeful that they do not fall on deaf ears.
Well, the state needs to go in and buy some of that shopping center and give us a turnaround. But
I'm
that's
just gonna say that they should go in there, and that's what wind up happening is they'll all go into that shopping center and turn around.
Yep.
And both of them, the one further south and the nearest one.
Yes, Mr. Moretti, you're absolutely correct.
Now, I will
Okay.
also say the no left turn out of there is huge. We
Oh,
do have a
yes.
towing company, and I cannot tell you the amount of accidents that we clean up and clear from Ford Road there. It's a disaster.
Mr. Pate? We're not kidding.
Understood. It's why we led with it. 'Cause
We have experience. We live here, you
Yeah.
know?
No,
And so maybe no left turn,
sure.
but you know, I'll let DOT figure it out.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Kennel, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Fine.
Mr. Pape, do you have any other professionals?
We do, and I'm most pleased that Katie Flores, our architect, is ready to present the building and hopefully to have some good answers to the questions that have come up during the earlier testimony. If we can have Ms. Flores admitted, and then we'll swear her in. Katie, you got to open that mic and turn on your camera.
Correct. I have the mic open. I have to just check my setting because it's zoomed as a default where I don't have my camera. 1 second.
Oh, we need you.
Yeah, understood. Give me 1 more second. My husband is my IT guy. Hold on, he has to change it
Good
to
to
me.
have an IT guy.
1 second.
Everybody needs one.
There you go.
There you go. Now just turn on that microphone.
Hello.
Hi. So if Ms. Flores could be sworn in, please.
Mr. Bear. You're muted, Mr. Bear.
Yes, Ms. Flores, raise your right hand, please. Do you swear the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, sir.
Okay, state your name for the record and spell your last.
Katie Flores, Flores.
Okay.
Thank
Witness is sworn, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Flores,
Thank you, Mr. Bear.
please share with the board, the board's professionals, and the public your education and professional background.
Sure, thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, board, Mr. Chair. I received my Bachelor's of Architecture from the New Jersey School of Architecture at NJIT. I've been a registered architect in the state of New Jersey for over 14 years and worked in the design profession for over 20. I have worked at various design firms in New Jersey, as well as New York and California and Minnesota. And I have actually testified before this board in Howell and others in New Jersey over the past 14 years.
Mr.
Very
Chairman,
good.
I ask that the board accept Ms. Flores and allow her to testify as an architect this evening.
We'll accept Ms. Flores and allow her to testify as an architect this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you,
So,
sir.
Ms. Flores, before we get into it, I'm sure it's going to be a very organized presentation. I would like you to speak to the comments that I made earlier this evening about your ability to modify your building so that it will be no taller than 52 feet, not over 60 feet as currently designed. If you could just speak to that and make those, share those remarks with the board and the board's professionals.
Yep, so in designing a building, we typically set floor to floor heights. That's how the overall building height is determined. With the design change to reduce the building height to 52 feet, that gives us approximately 13 feet floor to floor height. What we'll have to do in our design is more interior based, where our finished ceilings, where we originally wanted them 10.5, maybe even 11 feet in some areas, we will have to reduce to 9 feet to allow for a few feet of obviously all the mechanical ductwork, lighting and whatnot. And then the building structure itself is anywhere between 18 inches to 2 feet deep. So overall, we'll just have to reduce the interior finished ceilings of our space in order to kind of just reduce the overall height, on each floor to get it down to the 52 feet as the maximum.
We haven't gotten into the environmental impacts. I mean, the architectural impacts, the beauty of this building, and I'm going to call it an iconic building. But if you could just make an opening statement to the board that the integrity of the design of this building will not be lost if the building's overall height is reduced as we've just committed.
Correct. We intend to maintain the beauty and design of this, I agree, very iconic building. The architectural features and angles and building material is what we plan, to construct. We will reduce what we need to, and just as far as modify proportionality, so I would call it, in as far as like the window size or whatnot. Right now, I think you're shown at 10.5 feet or so. Also, you have to reduce the height and the width, but keep the overall proportion and beauty and integrity of the design features of the building.
So with that as a necessary opening statement, I'm going to ask if you could, I think that it would be best if you relied on A21 and A22, the color renderings of the northeast corner and northwest corner of the building. Is that where you'd like to begin?
That's fine. Yes, I wasn't sure which ones we had.
Okay.
So to orientate everyone to the building, where you see on the right side of the screen, what we're calling the entry area. So that is actually the north face of the building. So everyone knows from already seeing the site plan that the parking lot is on the north side facing Ford Parkway. So what you're looking at is the Ford and then Route 9 corner of the building is what you're looking at. That would also face the parking lot. So the design intent of the building, you see kind of these two masses at play. which I agree is very iconic building. The primary building materials, besides the glass that you will see, are an AMC panel, which is an aluminum composite panel, and then EFIS, also known as stucco. It's a exterior insulated finish system. The colors obviously are a nice, which I think is great as far as the iconic architecture of the building. An orangish color, and then the black and the gray, which are more standard in office buildings. The entry will be flanked by what we're calling this decorative awning. Once again, kind of going with the asymmetrical features of the building. We talked about the 3 and 4 stories of the building. So the 4 stories is actually set furthest away from Route 9. It's about 1/3 of the floor space of the rest of the building. So that's the element you see that's angled up at the farther right hand of the screen. Yes, thank you. And then the corner we're looking at, that's really this glass front corner, is where the 3-story building is, with the amenity deck that we talked about earlier. I think there's another view. If you could show it, please. Great, thank you. So this is really the forward exterior elevation of the building. As far as design of the exterior, where the office space is on the left-hand side, we were to look at the floor plan, it's primarily designed to be ribbon windows to allow a lot of natural light into the office areas. The right-hand side that you're seeing is actually more the utilitarian function of the building, as far as the exit stairs, janitor closet, restrooms. So it's designed to be more of this punched window opening to contrast the ribbon windows on the left-hand side. You do also see the ramp proposed across the building is out of ground a few feet per the flood elevation, which we had talked about earlier. We will obviously have an accessible ramp. The entire site will be accessible as well to get to the main entrance of the building.
And Ms. Flores, there was a question earlier this evening about the potential number of tenants in the building. And I know there's lots of ways to carve up a 27,000 square foot office building. What is the projection for the number of tenants that would be in this building?
So, like you said, there's a few ways to carve up the building based on really just going by the square footage of the building code. It's about, the calculations, 70 people or so per floor. Realistically, once you get in cubicles or offices, it's actually closer to 40 something, 40 occupants per floor. So anywhere, it's a big range between 40 and 70 is more likely in each office space.
So that's the number of anticipated tenancies, some number between 40 and 70.
Per floor, correct. Kind of the workstations that would be set
Okay,
up.
so that's workstation, not individual tenants.
Correct. Well, yes, I guess I'm not sure.
Yeah.
The design of the floor right now is mostly open. So
Yeah.
as you said, it could be carved out in multiple ways to squeeze in 70 or comfortably fit 40.
And there was also a question about the use of the amenity on the top of the third floor, and concerns about whether it could be for any uses other than the tenants as a tenant's amenity, and whether it could be used at any time other than during the normal business hours. Could you speak to that?
Yes, so the design of what we're calling the fourth floor terrace is only to be used during business hours for the building tenants.
And so designed for the tenants and only during the normal business hours. So we can go one step further, I think, on the record and state, it is not a space that is available for rent. It is not a space that is available for events. It is a space that is strictly for the amenity, as an amenity for the tenants in the building.
Correct.
Mr. Pape?
Yes, sir.
So are we saying that like it's, open kitchen area?
I think Katie can go through it. It's an open sitting area, but Katie, if you could just describe the way that it's designed to be used.
So I'm not sure if you have the plans that you can open. It's primarily designed to be just amenity deck for tenants, whether they take, a break during just their after work day, want to go have the lunch out there. It's not fully designed yet. Obviously, there will at some point be rooftop mechanical units that we need to position. So it's shown kind of as a blank canvas now, but as we all know, between roof drains and mechanical equipment, more of that space will be taken up. But there's no kitchen, no cooking. It's really just a amenity deck space for someone to go have their lunch break on.
And there are sanitary facilities up there?
Correct. Yeah, the building code requires all levels to have restrooms.
Okay. Is that all? Or do you have more?
I don't have anything else to present, Ken.
I mean, our client has just shared with me that.
Excuse me for 1 second. I got a question. I'm sorry. I had my thing on mute.
You're not.
Where would the air conditioning be and everything on the fourth story building? You're going to have outside air conditioning, I would assume.
Correct. So that's not decided. The rooftop units will be either on as I mentioned, on that the floor terrace area, or on the roof of that four-story section. Obviously, they will be screened per township ordinance and located, towards the center of the building.
So it'll be screened so no one from the outside could look up and see it. Is that true?
Correct. They'll be screened per the township ordinance.
So Ms. Flores, there is no large mechanical room, I take it, where we have a centralized air package handling unit that pushes air into the building? Is that kind of being?
Yes, the design is not intended to have an interior air handling unit. We would go with more standard offices of having rooftop packaged mechanical units.
Charlie?
Sorry, I lost the mute button for a second. Yeah.
I mean, any questions here, or are we good?
Yeah, so So I guess, my question would be any rooftop mechanicals and stuff like that. I believe on the architectural plans they presented, obviously it doesn't reflect what they're agreeing to with some of the internal roof changes. The 3rd story terrace looks like it, or the, let's see, 1, 2, 3. So it's like technically it's a 4-story terrace, right? That has a 4-foot high parapet. So I think I would just ask, any rooftop mechanicals be located to the center portion of the roof. So that way, that 4-foot parapet does more to obscure the sight line when you're looking at it from ground level. If they're to be put on the top of so looking at this exhibit, the right-hand side of the building on that roof elevation, the plans show that having a 3-foot parapet. Same thing, I would have to be located to the center. I would be a little bit more concerned on that, especially with the height of the structure and how visible that might be. Certainly if it was on the lower area, it might be a little bit more effective, being that it's lower in height, and then also you have the 1-foot higher parapet. I just don't know how that works from a mechanical perspective. So any thoughts on that, Ms. Flores?
Yeah, we haven't gotten into full design of that. My concern with putting them in the center of the 3rd floor is then you just kind of eat up the entire amenity deck, where I prefer to put them closer to a corner if possible, whether it's an inside corner closer to the 4th floor, or as mentioned, come to the outside. I'm more than happy, obviously, to work with the township and obviously with Jennifer, what would be approved for those locations. My concern just on that 4th floor terrace, as you put in the center, they're loud when they're on, so they'll be screened. Is just, I prefer not to put them in the center of that if possible.
Yeah, so I mean, I would kind of defer to Jen on that if it's on that upper level roof, 3-foot high parapet to the center. Certainly 4-foot, that extra foot, I think gives a little bit more of a difference. But, if they were to want to increase that 3-foot high parapet to 4 feet, then it's exacerbating the height variance condition.
Yeah, and we talked about this earlier, Ms. Flores and I discussed this earlier, that, obviously this came up today, so I wasn't expecting like fully architecturally completed plans, but potentially like a lower parapet, moving the mechanical equipment closer to the center, but making sure that it's screened and that, we're not going to see it. Personally, I would rather see it on top of the 4-story piece, because then you don't have to worry about any people interacting with it. And nobody's gonna want to sit out at lunch and listen to like the humming. I mean, although you're right next to Route 9, so I don't know really how much better that's gonna be. But Mr. Chair, if the board acts affirmatively on the application, I'd be happy to work with Ms. Flores and come up with a location that is in compliance with citing them, and making sure that they're screened. Also, I think if it's on a higher floor, it's unlikely that it'll be seen by people that are at ground level. You know what I mean? Because it's higher up. So I'll work with her if the board approves the application to make sure that it is compliant with respect to screening and location.
Thank you, Jen. Jen, my concern would be, of course, how many penetrations are we going to make in the roof?
Yeah.
How many package units, small units are we going to put up there? Where the line's going to run, where the drain's going to go, and there's all of that to be considered. I have to make the assumption that that's only for air conditioning, not necessarily the heat. And then what is the purpose and what is the heating inside the building then? Is that going to be forced hot air? What are we looking at?
Yeah.
And so the climate of the control and the the environmentals in the building would have to be ironed out, of course.
Correct. Typically in this size office building, we would have one package unit that provides heating and cooling, one per floor. And then each floor, depending on how it's broken up, you'd have different zones, the VAV boxes kind of per each area of the floor. So you're looking at least the 4 penetrations through the roof, whether it's all on the upper level or 2 and 2, however it's divided per what we decide for those units. But they usually provide heating and cooling for each floor. And then as I mentioned, kind of there's different zone controls when you get to the individual levels.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I may have dozed off, I'm not sure or not, but that little black spot down at the bottom of the 4-story building, is that a driveway to under the building? Right there.
No, that's visually just the base of the building below the windows because of the way this rendering with the ramping up and the stairs up and down.
Okay.
That's actually the driveway, the level. But no,
So
there's
you
nothing
have a
underneath.
driveway under the building. In
No,
other
we do
words, you
not.
don't have a driveway.
No, it will be a slab on grade that first floor.
And then of course, Ms. Flores, this is going to have elevator, handicap access, the whole works, right?
Correct. The entire building will be accessible. Yes, sir.
Okay.
So, Mr. Say, I just have a couple things. Well, I can appreciate the architecture of the building. It is not in compliance with our architectural design standards that requires bump outs and recesses along any wall that's greater than 50 feet. You know, here, it's clear that it's not one monotonous building, which is really the intent of having these architectural design standards. The application would require relief. It's identified on page 5 of my letter. There's 3 sections of the ordinance, 188, 228B, 228C, and 228D. So as we've done with a lot of buildings in the past, so long as there's an intention to come to, make these buildings interesting, have them not be monotone across the frontage, we would take no exception if the board were to grant this waiver relief to the applicant.
Got it, Jen. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to open up to board members. Any board members have any questions for the architect?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I agree. I think putting everything on top of the 4th story would be much better. And I do like the idea of the terrace. I think it's pretty unique. Everything about the building looks really good to me. I just was one part of it I was just questioning to myself. It says each floor could accommodate 40 to 70 people. And then if you had, let's say 50 people, then you have, still only 90 parking spots. Is that going to be an issue?
If I might, I think Katie gave a very honest statement about the capacity of the building to have workstations, but the number of parking stalls for a building of this size was calculated following the ordinance and also cross-referenced against ITE.
Okay.
So we remain very comfortable.
Okay. I just wanted to be, throw that out.
I caught that as well, Mr. Mertens, because I'm adding, even at the 40 on 3 floors is, 120 people with 90 parking spaces. I guess if I maybe could clarify the statement, is it like 40 to 70 workspaces, not physical? I mean, so is that more, instead of people, it's like 40 to 70 workspaces per floor? And there's not an expectation that all of those workspaces will be full every day?
Correct.
Yeah. It's been our client's goal, and his goal is to have 3 tenants in this building. The building is designed to have, the overall design is to have 3 significant tenants. It was not envisioned that this would have many smaller tenants. Can't guarantee what's going to occur, but that's the goal, and the building's being designed for that purpose. So I think that you can see from the nature of the presentation, the improvements that our client has already sought, the improvements that he's committing to make, and this is not a run-of-the-mill building. This is a major investment by our client, and major investment would not be made if there was anticipation that the parking was inadequate.
I understand that. I just want to make sure that we're not going to see cars parked along the shoulder of Ford Road because there's not enough parking in the parking lot. I mean, obviously they're not going to park on Route 9, but I don't think that the residents that live on Ford Road would appreciate, cars being parked there all the time.
I think, yeah, we're comfortable in that regard.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, just one clarifying question about this architectural rendering, and it might just be how it's shaded. But the orange band that's between like the parapet and that accent like overhang, is that uplighting proposed? Or is that just?
No, that's just the way the rendering turned out, but that orange band would not be illuminated.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
question, Ms. Flores. I know it's a rendering, but I wonder if she could speak to the reflective properties of the glass or mirrored glass that's there. My concern would be due to the closeness of the building to Route 9, that either a bright sunny day or even oncoming traffic at night wouldn't create some kind of glare for traffic traveling along Route 9.
Yeah, so the intent of the design is actually not to have mirrored glass. Speaking with the client, they would like a highly tinted glass, mostly so you don't obviously see into the office building, so it's more private, but the intent is not to do mirrored glass.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other board members?
Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, I know you guys said that the goal is to have 3 tenants,
But have 3 large tenants, yes, sir.
but like you said, you can't guarantee that. I'm just curious, is there a maximum amount of tenants that the building is allowed to have? I don't know if that's a stupid question or I'm just looking for some clarity as to how busy this building might be, especially given the amount of people that it could accommodate per floor.
Mr. Stanton, first off, that's not a stupid question. The only stupid question is the one that's not asked, so. Go ahead, Mr. Pape.
Sure. Katie, are there any building code elements that dictate the minimum size of any given tenant?
Not that I'm aware of, not in the building code.
Yeah.
So
There might be a
essentially,
real estate.
this could like have a lot of tenants and use a lot of parking and stuff like that. Is that like an open-ended thing?
The parking requirement, Mr. Stanton, is based on the ordinance. The ordinance is based on gross square footage. And the testimony that we've had is that we've parked it in accordance with your ordinance and cross-checked it against the national standards of the ITE. So we remain comfortable that the parking that is provided is adequate for a building of this size.
I'm more concerned with the capacity of the building, less concerned with the parking. Just how many people would be using and occupying. Just looking for some clarity, that's all.
I don't think there's anything further. I'm sorry.
No, good. I was just gonna say, you're so right, Bill. They had made a statement that the floors would hold anywhere between 40 to 60 people. And that's 40 being the lesser of, and 70 being the most. And the parking spaces are only 90. So you divide that by 3, or even, what do you call it? You go over to the other building that has 4, an extra floor to it. I mean, you're talking about a lot of people, and I doubt if they're all going to be coming in car sharing.
I mean, my
occupancy.
My
There's gotta be
concern
occupancy
lies if there's
standards. I
like,
know that when we're on buildings.
Yeah, the potential number of workstations is the number that Ms. Flores placed. I mean, it's a building size and the number of parking stalls is an established element of your ordinance, and there's no relief that's requested from that. I don't want to be beating a dead horse here, but we have a very high comfort level that the parking ratio to the size of the building is the right one, and it'll work.
I get that. My like I said, my main concern was the amount of tenants, whether you have 15 tenants as opposed to 3 is a big difference.
Yeah. Sitting here, I have an 8,200 square foot office building. There are 3 tenants in our 8,200 square feet, and there are 14 people who work in our our building. And I don't know if that's on a normal or high or low side, but it seems to be typical of the office buildings in the complex around here. So I'm drawing on that, my own personal experience with that. And
Yeah, but what is the projection for this building?
it's
Ms. Flores, the projection was 40 to 70 people per floor.
So I
No.
think
Sorry.
I can clarify that. So the way the building code calculates kind of egress capacity is at 100 square feet per person. The overall square footage of the building, I said, kind of being 7,000+ per square foot is where you get the 70 people. Once you put in hallways, the elevator, the stairs, the bathrooms, your usable square footage for that 100 square feet per person is reduced significantly down. I would say even to 55 to 60. There was in the presentation kind of a potential office layout for, I think it was the 3rd floor, but don't quote me on that, for one of the 3 main levels, not the 4-story portion, which is where I said where the elevator and stairs are located. So with that office layout, which is more typical, it would be about 40 people. As much as you try to divide it, per I think Mr. Steffensen, say your last name, you raised a great point, but once you start to divide a building into separate tenants, then you have hallways to actually get less usable square footage because you get more hallways to get to the tenant spaces. So an open office area of, like I said, 40 people may in the end, once you subdivide it into multiple tenants, you may only be allowed 30 people on that floor based on the usable square footage and how egress has to work. So sorry for the confusion by saying the number 70. If you wanted to pull up the presentation where it shows a potential office layout, that may help give more clarity at how the building is laid out to give kind of the rough estimate of the 40 people. I still understand 40 times 3 is more than the 90. To your point, Ken, we don't foresee every tenant at every workstation being there, 9 through 5, Monday through Friday. It is a different era we live in, kind of even the pre-COVID times. Not everybody is at their workstation every single day, the Monday through Friday work week. So if you want to pull up the plan, that might be helpful. I don't know.
No, your explanation was right on the money. No problem. Very clear.
And Ms. Flores, I apologize if I confuse things.
Oh, no, not at all.
No. My main question, and maybe I didn't articulate it properly, was if this building was going to be consisting of like 10 by 10 units or like 50 by 50 units. You know what I'm saying? I was just trying to get a gauge on how the building would be utilized. This is going to sound wrong, but I don't care what the capacity per square foot is. I was just curious how it would be broken up.
Yeah, and I think the marketing, as Mr. Pape said, is they really want to try to get one tenant per floor. The way the building is designed for the lease, whatnot, kind of how it works in the owner's world, that's what they're going to market towards. Like you said, it might be subdivided 1 or 2. I don't foresee it being subdivided to, 15 tenants.
Thank you.
And again, I apologize if I misled that conversation.
No problem. I may have misled with the quote kind of per the building code numbers. I live in that world a lot too for egress.
Okay, any other board members, any questions?
Mr. Chairman, just a brief statement. I don't think we have a building quite so unique in the architectural design in Howell. I think it makes a great addition to our township. It's quite striking. It's pretty.
It is. It complements the Union Valley building to which our, town headquarters are located. Absolutely. Right?
I would just caution the board, all the evidence isn't in yet, so you may want to wait till.
I know. I'm talking to the architectural design.
Got it.
Well, that's it. Okay.
We have one final witness, Mr. Chair.
Let's get that person sworn in.
Very
Mr.
fine.
Pape.
Mr. Chairman, it is 10 p.m. So just so we're clear, I don't know where we're going tonight, if we finish or not.
Yeah, Mr. Pape, what's your desire? I mean, I gotta ask the board what their desire is. I know the board wants to finish.
What's your last person's name?
Christine Cafone is our professional planner. She is a very organized, efficient presenter. I anticipate that it will be somewhere between 10 to 15 minutes of direct testimony that will be presented without my interruption. Christine
And then-
testifies in the narrative.
And then we'll open it back up to the public. And then,
I have no problem with that because she's, like you say, she's very proficient.
Mr. Cantor?
No,
She
no
is great,
issues.
But I'd like to go to bed.
Yeah.
You'll tell us.
And Ken, I think the other question is, even if you get everything in, are you requesting a vote this evening, or do you want to carry till we have like a regular members, or I'm not sure what.
We do have 7.
You're sitting with 7 members, Mr. Bayer. I don't think I get to cherry pick the members. If there's a 7-member
Nope.
board here this
Okay.
evening, we would be most comfortable going to vote if we concluded.
Okay.
Okay, let her testify, and then we'll see where we are.
Thank you.
Mr.
I wanted to
Mr.
make just
Cantor, one sec. Mr. Cantor, you're good?
Yes.
All right. Everybody else, Matt, Mr. Stanton, I know you're tired. You can hang in there, Mr. Rubel. Thank you. Okay. All right, Mr. Pape, let's do it.
Sure. There's only one statement that I wanted to make before Ms. Cafone began testifying. Earlier in the evening, there was a statement made that this is the last property in Howell. I would choose to look at this as the very first property in Howell. This is an introduction to anyone entering Howell with what is intended to be an iconic and a very beautiful building. So with that, I'm going to ask if we could have Ms. Cafone sworn quickly through her credentials, and we'll go right into her narrative presentation of proofs.
Ms. Cafone, do you swear the testimony you'll give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Just state your name for the record, spell your last.
So good evening, Chairman and members of the board. It's Christine Nazaro, Nazzaro, Cafone, Cofone. Business address is 125 Half Mile Road, Suite 200, Red Bank, New Jersey, 07739. Wait, or 60. Wait, no, 07701. Sorry. 07. I don't send myself mail a lot, so 07701. Can everybody hear me okay? Despite 2.5 years, I am still anxious every time I log on that I am heard properly. So, okay, good to know. Fortunately, on this one, we don't have a whole
Ms.
lot.
Cafone, can we have your credentials put on the record, please?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I am a licensed professional planner. I've been testifying as such in the state of New Jersey for 27 years. I have been qualified here in Howell and well in excess of 400 and something other planning and zoning boards throughout the state of New Jersey. I routinely offer planning testimony. My licenses are current and valid. I am an affordable housing special master, and I teach planning and zoning courses for the Rutgers Center for Government Services.
We accept your credentials. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Sayo.
Christine, I'm going to ask the last time you're going to hear me until you complete your testimony, but if you could just let the board know what you do to be prepared this evening, so that what do you do in the way of an investigation, and then if you'd identify to the board our obligations to this board and take us through the proofs and conclude with your professional opinions. Thank you.
Certainly, of course. So I do the same thing for whatever variance that we're seeking. Is I review all the application documents. So that means anything that we submitted in conjunction, Mr. McFarland's plans, Mr. Kennel's traffic report, Ms. Flores' architectural plans. I take the opportunity to review all of those things. Mr. Pape always quarterbacks a professional meeting where we get together via Zoom or at his office and we go over all of these documents. And then I also review the review letters that your professionals prepare. Of course, the T&M review letter, but also Ms. Beam's letter, which is dated July 21st, 2022. And I go over that. And then I look at the master plan and your zoning ordinance in Howell, and I visit the site, and I use all of those things to inform my opinion on the the variance relief that we are seeking. And in this particular case, while your zoning board has jurisdiction of the application, it is because we need a D6 variance for height. And that is because we violate the height by more than 10% in the underlying HD1 zone. And why that's important is because on some other use variances or D variances that you hear the planner talk about things like particular suitability or the Medici enhanced reconciliation. And the reason you're not going to hear that tonight is because the office building that's before you is a specifically permitted use in the HD1 zone. But we are, and as submitted, the application for height was about 65 feet. And you heard this evening, we brought that down significantly. So, but we still are in the D variance range. And that's why your board retains jurisdiction of the application. In addition to that, we do need a couple other review variances that were in fact identified by Ms. Beam. We need the technical variance for the wetland buffer to our, I believe it's our western property line. And as Ms. Beam points out in her review letter, that area is encumbered by wetlands. So we really can't touch it or put that buffer in there. So I would say that that is certainly a C1 variance. The difference, I know we have a new board member tonight, so I'll give you a very Cliff Reader's Digest, Cliff Notes version of the bulk variances. You can grant variances under the C1 or C2 statutory criteria. That's not unique to Howell Township. It's not my crafty planning lingo or Jennifer's planning lingo. It comes right out of the statute. C1 has to be some type of hardship, and it has to be something to do with an encumbrance on the property, not a financial hardship, not a personal hardship, but rather something about your property that makes it unique and sets it apart as to why you can't comply. And here, of course, as you heard Mr. McFarland and Dr. Walker testify, this is a substantially constrained property with respect to wetlands and flood hazard areas. So that sets up perfectly from a planning point of view for a C1 variance because there are hardships that we have to design around. In addition to a C1, the board can grant what's called a C2 or flexible C variance if you find that one or more purposes of the land use law statute would be advanced. And that is where I think our sign variance would fall. We need, as pointed out on page 4 of Ms. Beam's review letter, we need a variance for the 7-foot clearance. We have about 2 feet of clearance. I know that there was discussion earlier this evening that this is not a retail site, it's an office building site. It's not like people are going to be searching for retail tenants. So I think that that's an appropriate clearance for that height. And we also need some relief for the architecture of the building. As Ms. Beam points out, we do need some technical, and I would say, and I say that technical because I do agree with her characterization. You know, why do we put those requirements into our zoning ordinances as planners? We write those architecture requirements in so that we can get architecturally interesting buildings that don't have long monolithic walls and no breaks in elevation and no curb appeal. And here, I think, you know, just jotting down some of the words I've heard to describe this building tonight, you know, iconic, striking, pretty. I would agree with all of those. The curb appeal is off the charts on this building. So I think that the board could certainly look favorably on those waivers and find that you're still accomplishing the intent of your ordinance. So I think the board can certainly grant that variance package that's required in conjunction with this application with 3 purposes of the land use law. And again, those purposes are identified at 40:55D-2 and the municipal land use law, and they're identified by letter and not number. Again, not unique to Howell Township. I didn't make these up. They come right out of the statute. But I think criteria G, which talks about sufficient space in appropriate locations, as well as criteria M, an efficient use of the land, is important here to recognize that those purposes are advanced, specifically because you heard earlier that the building that exists on the property today is 8,000 square foot footprint. That's consistent with what we're proposing, still an 8,000 square foot footprint, but we get it out of the environmentally sensitive areas, which is beneficial. I also think it's an efficient use of the land because in the HD1 zone, you are allowed up to 70% impervious coverage. Our site, while we need the excess height variance and the 4 stories here, we only have 28.3% impervious coverage. So that to me as a planner speaks volumes to the fact that we are not looking to shoehorn something on this property. It's simply just that our site has the environmental encumbrances. So in order to redevelop this property, we had to go up and not out. It's it's a, pretty clear to me when you look at those things that this is a challenge site. I also do think criteria I, which talks about a desirable visual environment, is going to be achieved by this application. So that's the positive criteria. Statutorily, we would have to advance one or more of those purposes of the municipal land use law, but I think 3, G, M, and I can be comfortably relied upon here. And that leaves us with a burden of proof with respect to the negative criteria. And that doesn't ask you to hold us or any other applicant to such a standard that there be no detriment, just that the benefits of the grant of the variance outweigh the detriment. And I don't need to rehash all the benefits that you heard earlier this evening, but very quickly they were getting the building out and further away from the stream corridor, having the highest part of our building or the tallest part being the furthest away from Route 9. So there are definitely some benefits of this. And then when you look at the fact that the 2019 reexamination report in Howell on page 8 reads, to encourage the redevelopment of revitalization of vacant or underutilized properties. As a property that sat vacant for nearly 25 years in town, as the beginning or the end of town, however the board members choose to look at it, it almost feels like that master plan goal was written for this particular site. So with that being said, I think that statutorily, this is a textbook satisfaction of all of the variance relief, the D6 for height, as well as those ancillary bulk variances for the buffer and the sign and the waiver requirements for the architecture. I think this is a textbook satisfaction and a really good application that meets its burden of proof and really puts a challenge site environmentally back to productive use in accordance with what your master plan called for in 2019.
Thank you, Mr. Fong.
I have a single question for you. Just please take into consideration the 3 years of environmental work that our client did with his environmental team. And how do you factor that into the proofs that are required for this board to consider?
It's absolutely a benefit, and it's in the public good. The benefits outweigh the detriment. And I know that the board is tired and wants to go home, so I didn't want to spend too much time on that. But it's a real clear benefit here. Unfortunately, we had the benefit of Dr. Walker's testimony, and we got a fabulously clean letter from the Environmental Commission. So we've done some really amazing things to get this very challenged property back to a productive use.
Thank you. I have nothing further, Mr. Chair. Thank you very
Ms.
much.
Beam.
Yes, Mr. Chair. So one of the things that I think is important to note here is that, and I think Ms. Cafone went through it, albeit a little quickly, is that this is not the typical variance that we hear where it's not a permitted use and she's trying to justify that the site is an appropriate location, the use is not going to create any negative impacts. Here, we're just talking about the height of the structure. And because it's more than 10% over what we allow, which is 45 feet, they require a D variance for the height. And I think in this particular instance, the applicant at the outset of the meeting stated their willingness to reduce the height, which was proposed at 65 feet, which in my opinion was going to be difficult, to 52 feet, which is, less than 2% of the total 45 feet. It's 7 feet over what is permitted, right? So if it was 49.5 feet, this application would be at the planning board. So we're really only here for about 2.5 feet over what would be considered a bulk variance before the planning board. And I think if you also look at the architecture, which it appears that you all spoke very favorably about, it's not the entirety of the building that hits that 52-foot mark. It's the piece of the building that's farthest off the road, off Route 9, back against the environmentally constrained area. I agree with the testimony that's been provided that the benefit of redeveloping this site that has sat as an eyesore for 2 decades, moving development out of the environmentally sensitive areas, creating a very visually interesting building. I think the benefits of this outweigh the detriments. And in fact, I would prefer as well the graduated building as opposed to just a plain flat roof building, which I don't think would be as interesting. So I would agree with the testimony provided, and I think that the burden of proof throughout that testimony has been met, and I take no exception if the board were to act favorably on the application.
Thank you, Ms. Beam. Charlie, you're good?
I have nothing, Mr. Chair.
Got it. Any of the fellow
Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
just
Board
real
member.
fast,
Go ahead.
the representation that the building's been vacant 20 to 25 years, I don't think that's true. I used to eat there. It's got to be between 10 and 15 years, just for the record.
Thank you.
Thank
I agree with you, Mr. Cantor. It was closed, open, closed, it
Yeah.
reopened. I remember, yes.
Yeah, we used to celebrate high school graduations there, and that was about 10 years ago.
Okay. Any of the other board members have any questions?
No.
Okay. Well, what I would like to do is open it up to public for traffic, architecture and planner. Can I have a motion, please?
Make a
Motion.
motion that we open to the public.
All right, we got Moretti and
I'll second.
Merton.
Sorry, Rich.
That's okay, Jim.
Eileen, we're opening to public. Well, a roll call and then open to public, please.
Mr. Cantor,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
Yes.
Mr. Mertens,
Yes.
Mr. Moretti,
Yes.
Mr. Stanton,
Yes.
Mr. Rubel,
Yes.
and Chairman Saya.
Yes, please open, Eileen.
The meeting will now open to the public. If you're calling in, you could press *9 to raise or lower your hand and *6 to mute and unmute yourself.
We'll wait another minute or so. No one dialing in, Eileen?
No, no one's raising their hand from the public.
Okay. Going once, going twice. Going 3 times. Motion to close, please.
Motion to close, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Hughes. Do we have a second to close?
I'll second that.
Mr. Cantor. Eileen? We're closing the public.
The meeting is now closed to the public.
And all board members in favor? Aye.
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 Okay, so Mr. Pape, Mr. Bear. We would like to probably bring this to fruition, however it rolls. So my fellow board members, you've heard all the testimony.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if Mr. Pape has any closing statement before you go there.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, I
Sorry to
can do a
interrupt.
closing statement in under 1 minute because I have watched all night as every board member was following every element of the presentation, but you heard the engineer describe all of the improvements, and I would say with a very significant focus on stormwater management. And you heard Dr. Walker's description of all the steps that were taken to get the environmental issues identified and under control. And you heard Scott Kennel make the commitment that we'd like to go to the DOT together to get the best end result. I think that Ms. Flores presented all of the best aspects of the building and provided testimony that the building will be modified as recommended by Ms. Beam. And I think that Ms. Coffone's testimony did a wonderful job of just bringing it all together with a bow and took all the facts that were placed before you, all the commitments that the applicant made, and used all of that as a foundation for requesting the relief. You pointed out that the relief was not a great relief. That, together with the commitments that we've made this evening to work with your staff to address all of the concerns of your landscape architect and Charlie Cunliffe, I would ask you to consider as a rock solid foundation for this board to grant the requested relief. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pape. So my fellow board members, as you have heard the testimony and the presentation from Mr. Pape, the applicant attorney. You know, there's an opportunity for this board to go ahead. It requires 5 affirmatives in order to move it forward. So I would ask, you know, what is the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, based on the testimony, finding and facts, I very much loved seeing Route 9 being fixed up where you have these vacant buildings. And I believe in this situation, the applicant has done a very good job complying and getting all the permits. I think the architectural part of the building is very good. And I like the idea that it is the higher part of the building is in the rear. So I don't believe this is going to have any detriment, you know, negative impact on the appearance. And I think it's a good application, and I am going to make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Mertens. We have a motion to approve on the floor. Do we have a second?
I second that motion. I have family members that live right down Ford Road, and they pass by that site daily. And it's been an eyesore for the longest time. So if we could have something put there that would improve the area, I'm for it. I second my motion.
Thank you, Mr. Moretti. Eileen, can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Cantor,
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Pape, I just want to say that one of the deciding factors in my vote is that you presented to the Environmental Commission and Ms. Dowd, and she recommended that you put in native trees to encourage the wildlife in this area. I really appreciate you going to the Environmental Commission and taking that extra step. And obviously the plans are well thought out and well researched. My vote is yes.
Mr. Hughes,
Yeah, I'm going to agree with my fellow board members. Very thorough, very well put together, as always, with Mr. Pape's guidance, and a beautiful building. So I vote yes.
Mr. Mertens,
Yes.
Mr. Moretti,
Yes.
Mr. Stanton,
I'll be honest, initially I was probably going to be a no vote. But you guys are taking an unutilized piece of property in town that needs to be redeveloped. My only objection was 4 stories, but no resident spoke up that it was an issue. So if they don't take an issue, I don't. Great luck with your project, and thank you for helping redevelop.
Thank you, Mr. Stanton.
Mr. Rubel,
Great presentation by all on the applicant's side. I approve and look forward to seeing it on my drive down Route 9.
and Chairman Saya.
Yes, I would like to first, you know, give you the reasons why. Septic has to be removed. The blight of the property, the fact that we're gonna remove the vagrants and get rid of the trailers and improve the environmental situation at this site, along with the compelling argument that we are going to improve the traffic and the, or at least we're going to make a presentation to the traffic, Department of Traffic, for the ingress egress of the site. You know, there's a lot to be thankful for here, and thank you, Mr. Pape, and my vote is yes.
Application is approved.
So, Mr. Chairman and board members, on behalf of our client, Shlomo Rosenbaum, and personally, I thank all of you, and good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, Mr. Pape.
Good night, Mr. Pape. So Eileen, when's the next meeting?
Next meeting is August 8th.
August 8th. Okay.
It's going too fast.
It is going very fast. Eileen, do we want to talk about getting back into the building live, or we have to work that 2 months in advance?
I believe so. Eileen hasn't said anything to me about it, so I'm not sure.
All right, ask her what she's thinking, please.
Okay, I will.
And then Also, Mr. Aguirre and Eileen, you know, for the new member, Mr. Rubel, I don't know if he needs a card, that he's a member of the zoning board. This way, if he's looking at a piece of property, he can go and he could show his card and the reason why he's there.
I think all of ours are out of date, actually, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I think so, but.
I don't
you
have a
know,
card.
I don't know.
Well, then we may have to take a look. We need to take a look at those as well. Okay, well, listen, thanks, everyone. May I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Okay, do we have a second? Mertens, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, Mr. Bear, Jennifer, Charlie, thank you.
Good night,
Thank
Mr.
you
Chairman.
all
Good
the
night.
board members.
Good night, board
Eileen,
members.
thank you.
Good night.
Sharon,
Good
we're
night,
Have a good
guys.
evening, everyone.
not leaving you out. Mr. Aguirre, we're not
Thank
leaving you out.
you. Thank you, Paul, for a wonderful evening.
You're welcome.
Welcome aboard.